Hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to call this special meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee to order. And may I please have roll call?
Sure. Committee members Armenian,
Present.
Garibian,
Here.
Manukian,
Present.
Vice Chair Avedisian,
Present.
and Chair Quinones Gabrielian.
Here. Okay.
The agenda for the August 28, 2023 special meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee was posted on or before Friday, August 25th, 2023 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 2 minutes at A, approval of the minutes of the March 3rd, 2023 CDBG Advisory Committee special meeting.
I move to approve.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And B?
B is approval of the minutes of the March 6, 2023 CDBG Advisory Committee special meeting.
Move to approve.
I'll second that.
Any changes? Roll call, please.
Okay, committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Garibian,
Yes.
Manukian,
Yes.
Vice Chair Avedisian,
Yes.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oral communications, correct? Are there any
We
cards?
don't have any cards or any callers at this time.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go right into reports for information only.
Yes, and at 4A, it's Consolidated Plan 2025 to 2030 update, oral report.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, we're going to give you a very brief oral report on our consolidated plan. It's upcoming in 2025 to 2030, and currently we are going to be program planning for the last year of our current consolidated plan. We refer to it as the CON plan, and we're going to be in year 5 of the CON plan in 24-25. And at this time, we're in discussion phase with our housing division, our homeless services section, and of course, the CDBG section, because the consolidated plan includes all 3 of these federally funded programs. This is the time where we discuss program priorities, what we want to include and assess in the city of Glendale, on how we want these funds to be allocated, where we see gaps, data-driven, very data-driven. Therefore, we are looking to hire a consultant. We did have a consultant on this current consolidated plan, and we're going to move forward again with hiring a consultant for the upcoming consolidated plan. So that being said, we are in discussion phase at this time. We are looking to RFP and then have a professional services agreement with a local consultant, someone on the West Coast. We will be bringing back a report, a formal report to the advisory committee once we square away all of those details.
Okay. Yes.
What are the qualifications or profile of the consultant that you're looking for?
So the consultant, committee member Armenian, the consultant that we have for this particular plan this year was Veronica Tam and Associates. She's a professional planner, and she has been doing this job and doing the housing element for over 20 years. What we usually do is we look to our National Development Association that we partner with, and they let us know what the list is of current consultants, because most cities usually use a consultant, and they give us a West Coast list. And we went as far as Washington State. Usually, as Ms. Alexanian and I were kind of crunching the numbers in this kind of implementation phase, we figured that transportation, that's going to bring up the consultant fees. So we're looking for a local consultant who's done at least some cities that are comparable to Glendale. And Ms. Tam, if I can recall back to 4 years ago, had done Salinas, California, and that was pretty comparable. We felt that the population was large enough, diverse enough. And then she had a couple of other cities that she had worked with that we obviously vetted and asked questions about. We are going to be releasing that next year, so we'll have that list ready for you. It'll be more of a discussion, and we'll include the committee on that before we move forward.
Thank you.
We'll get a list together.
Any other questions? I have a quick one. How long is that planning process?
That's a very good question, Chair Quinones Gabrielian. When we started it 5 years ago, they basically do many community meetings. They go out into the public. There's a lot of surveys, stats, data collection. So you're looking at 6 to 8 months. That's why we're starting it so early, so we can get a head start on all those events that we have in Glendale, so they can attend those events and get more information from the public.
Any other questions? No. Go on to B then.
Next is 4B, Build America, Buy America, BABA Act Report. For BABA.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, we wanted to present a report to you on an upcoming act from the federal government called Build America, Buy America. We have a PowerPoint presentation for you, very brief, hoping it'll be brief for you. It's the BABA Act. And this basically started and it was enacted as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act back in November of 2021. Basically, it means that there should be a procurement preference for all federal financial assistance. So federal monies that are going towards procurement and are obligated to infrastructure projects have to abide by the BABA Act. And this is after May of 2022 that started. This requires, the BABA Act requires that all iron, steel, manufactured products and construction materials used in covered infrastructure projects have to be produced in the USA. And then it also applies to all CDBG capital improvement projects, including construction, alteration, maintenance, and/or repair. So what will BABA Act impact? Well, currently it will impact iron and steel. It'll impact specifically listed construction materials, like raw materials, non-ferrous, metals, plastic materials like PVC pipe, lumber, composite building materials. And then they have another category. It'll impact other construction materials. They consider glass and drywall. And then lastly, manufactured products. Now, the definition for this is forthcoming because there is no current definition for manufactured products because the federal government is still working on that language. This is very new. What's not impacted by BABA? Well, cement and aggregates, stone, gravel, sand is not affected. Now, let me give the committee a few HUD updates from the BABA Act. HUD has already established a leadership committee and identified CDBG as a BABA Act impacted program. In the current fiscal year 2023, HUD CDBG grant agreements will include BABA Act language, so we must abide by that in the current program year. Now, programs impacted by BABA include all CDBG CIP projects and Section 108 loans, which we've had in the past. Programs that are not affected by BABA Act are the CDBG CARES Act, because that was enacted back in 2020 and it doesn't fall under that umbrella. Now, HUD is currently working on guidance, waivers, obligation, and the phased implementation for CDBG impacted agencies. And they're also hosting a multiple amount of webinars to inform our entitlement communities on process and compliance, and we actually have one tomorrow as well. I was kind of bummed because I really wanted to see what the updates were. Maybe there's new definitions. So we'll, again, get back to you and we'll continually update you on the BABA Act as it's kind of being worked into the CDBG program. Now, the implementation schedule for BABA Act for HUD-funded programs. So currently, iron and steel, all the funds for iron and steel will be obligated on or before November 15th, 2022. So this affects CDBG projects in 2023. Specifically listed construction materials, that implementation for CDBG won't be in effect until 2024, 2025. So we still don't have to worry about that with our projects. Same goes for other construction materials. That will be implemented in 25, 26. So it's a staggered implementation, so agencies aren't kind of inundated with this rule so quickly. And then manufactured products are also going to be implemented in 25, 26, once we find out what that even is, because we don't know the definition yet. And then the BABA Act approach to implementation. So there's a phased approach, like we had mentioned, but there are some clauses to it. So there are urgent circumstances. So BABA Act will be waived if projects must be completed immediately to protect life, safety, or prevent destruction of property. So this waiver is in effect till 2028. Then there's de minimis, small grants, and minor components. So BABA Act, and this is very important because the committee makes funding recommendations. BABA Act is waived for projects $250,000 or less. It's also waived for de minimis portion, so exempts 5% of procurements above $250,000 as long as the 5% doesn't exceed $1 million. And this too is in effect until 2028. And then there are additional project-specific waivers that are going to be allowed. So there are 3 categories of project-specific waivers. Public interest waiver. So the BABA Act would be inconsistent. So assuming a public interest waiver would come into play if BABA Act would be inconsistent with public interest. And I gave an example of an installation of an electric vehicle charging station because that's very important. Or non-availability waiver. Covered materials that are not produced in the USA in sufficient and reasonably available quantities or in satisfactory quality. So we can get a waiver for that. And then there's the unreasonable cost waiver. Inclusion of domestically produced covered materials will increase the cost of the project by more than 25%. Now again, I had to put this in there. Since the BABA Act was implemented in an expedited fashion, the process for requesting project-specific waivers is under HUD development, and so more information will be shared as it becomes available. So if there are more waivers, or if the waivers have been skewed or changed, we're going to share that with the committee, especially during recommendation time. So looking at Glendale, what is the fiscal impact for the BABA Act? So fiscal year 23-24, which we are in right now, will be impacted if CDBG projects are greater than $250,000, and if CDBG projects are using iron and steel. Those are the 2 ways that they'd be impacted. So currently, we have one project that would be would have to be BABA compliant, and that's the Pacific Natural Gas Project, which is funded at $667,000 in 23-24. The city CIP section has already included BABA Act language in their design and planning documents for the Pacific Natural Gas Project. So we've already been very proactive with that. Now, by November of 2028, all provisions of the BABA Act will have an impact to CDBG CIP funded projects. This is where we wanted to share with the committee that we feel is most important to look at. So future anticipated impacts. Increased contractor bid submittals due to increased material costs and supply costs. Additional costs associated with providing supporting documentation. We still don't know how we're going to be reporting on this for BABA Act. And then possible delays in project completion due to the availability of the materials and supplies and other unknowns that we have yet to identify. So this is more of a stay tuned type of an act. We have to figure it out as we go. Any questions on this?
A lot of questions.
Okay, Ms. Manukian?
Thank you. I was wondering if there is a financial component to it in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act because of the increased costs. Is there a budget from the federal government to cover buying American?
At this time, committee member Manukian, we have no information on that. They have yet to tell us that. We would appreciate it, of course, but we don't know yet.
Is it something we're advocating for? That's a great question. How?
I don't know if there's room for advocating, but it's certainly, it's the first thing that popped into my mind.
We actually met in early August. We met with the Deputy Assistant Secretary of HUD, and they actually came to visit us at the City of Glendale. And her recommendation was to continue going to those webinars, continue listening to the updated information as it would come in. So that was her recommendation, just to continue to be on top of it, to hear where it's going. There's going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, and not just from HUD, but other federal departments. So we will definitely be back to let you all know how that unfolds.
Just to riff off that, I mean, we're going to have to, maybe in the next round of funding, consider how many ways we divide things, given that this is just headed toward you in higher costs. We were already dealing with that from an inflation perspective, and we're going to hear about one of the items today, kind of probably has to do with that. But my question is, how are we, or what is our role in enforcing this level of detail on these contracts? Like, how is it that we, staff, end up knowing within a contract or a contractor to outline kind of where they're getting what parts from, et cetera? Because, there's a million things that go into the supply chain on these projects. So what's the enforcement mechanism, I guess?
Good question, committee member Armenian. We're basically, it's all to be determined. It truly is. We are asking the same questions. Other agencies are asking the same questions. We are going to be informing our nonprofits in the upcoming open house and our technical support meetings of the BABA Act. Unfortunately, if I don't have the information in place and if HUD hasn't written that language yet, it's going to be very difficult to let them know what they need to produce. At this time, the city is going to have to produce the documentation once we know what that documentation is and how to report it. Usually, it does take time. I know it started in 2021. It does take the federal government a few years to get things going. But once they do, like I said, we will bring back a report. We will present it to the committee, and we will make recommendations based off of that.
Okay.
As you mentioned many times, it's obvious that there's so many questions, there's so many unknown answers because still in moving in parts. But a couple of things that it's still, one, what Mr. Armenian mentioned, how we're going to control that, and are we responsible for that, or as long as we tell them this is what you need to do we have to check their invoice where it's made, or as long as we told them and they signed it off that, hey, this is what you need to do, this is what I did, and that's where it ends our liability for it. That's one of my concerns, because we don't want to be responsible for it. But this also, I know I don't want to jump the agenda. We have coming up the timelessness of the issue, that we want to limit the time of the agencies. This obviously works against that. So we want something more, but yet we want to shorten their time frame. I think that's something to be concerned. But the 25% of the overall project part, not the material itself, but the total project cost,
That's how
not
we
to be
understood.
25%, not the material. And lastly says if it's sufficient and reasonably available, irrelevant of the cost,
Right.
just the quality and the quantity, irrelevant how much more it costs.
That is correct.
So if I can buy lumber for $1 versus here I gotta pay $20, that is not part of the
Well,
deal.
no, that would be the
We would-
25% though.
Right, but we would be submitting a
project.
project-specific waiver to HUD, and then they would have to approve it.
I see.
That's where it comes in at this point.
I mean, there's a lot more questions, but as you said, I'm not gonna get into it because a lot of stuff still on it. But from what we have so far, those are my questions. Thank you.
I was going to just make a comment that I would imagine the compliance would be similar to the prevailing wages compliance, where the contractor would have to sign a verification under oath saying that they're paying prevailing wages. I mean, we don't go into their bank accounts to check to see, but it's a verification process, I would imagine.
Actually, Committee Member Manukian, the prevailing wage process is a very long, I guess, a checks and balances system. And Ms. Kabanjan can attest to that because she's been doing that weekly with a couple of our projects that are currently in construction. So there is a section of HUD that does do the labor reviews. And that's what I'm assuming will happen with the BABA Act. There will be a section in, for HUD that will probably, do our audits and make sure that our paperwork's in order. For prevailing wage, Ms. Kabanjan actually goes to the site every week and interviews employees and asks their titles, their wages, and then she reviews all the payrolls and she checks against those. So it is a very long process for staff to do under prevailing wage. BABA Act, we're going to have to see how that works and what we need to produce. Like I said, a lot of questions.
Any other questions?
Just comment, I guess. With that just said, that means they're going to have to somehow raise the percentage what the staff can take back, what the city can take back from the funds in order to cover the expenses of the now this new program. Because if any kind of a verification as such, then you're going to have to have another staff member, another cost of labor, basically, in our end, at our end also. Which that's probably something that you may have to ask them or push them for more money.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing else then? We go to C.
4C, status of active year-to-date CDBG capital improvement projects.
Chair Quinones Gabrielli and members of the advisory committee, we have for you city and community capital improvement project status PowerPoint presentation to give you a breakdown of what has been happening since our last meeting in March. Currently, there are 3 city CIP projects in the pipeline. Technically, they are considered 2, but we break it down into 3 parts. The first is the Pacific Park Natural Grass Project, and then we have the Pacific Park Playground and Pool Shade Structure Improvement Project that goes along with the Pacific Park Splash Pad Project. And then under community CIP projects, we have quite a few. In 2023-2024, the committee made recommendations on repiping Ascensia. We have the Community Services Center for the Boy Scouts. We also have the parking lot project for neighborhood legal services, as well as the repairing and repaving of the parking lot for Home Enactment Autorot. In 22-23, we have the Lexington building for YWCA of Glendale and Pasadena. And then in 21-22, we have the first floor all-inclusive locker room for the YMCA. Alma House for Campbell Center, restroom renovations for Home Enactment Autorot, and then the Glendale Youth Center for Armenian Cultural Foundation. And then in 2020-2021, we have the Glendale Community Center roofing project for Catholic Charities, and then the roofing project for Home Enactment Autorot. And then lastly, in 19-20, we have the HVAC project from Home Enactment Autorot and the Glendale Community Center improvement project for Catholic Charities. So let's get into the city CIP project. Pacific Natural Grass Project was recently funded in 23-24. This was originally the artificial turf project, which in turn became the natural grass project. Total available budget for this is a little under 1.4 million. Like I had mentioned, natural turf is the choice surface for this field. Excavating existing grass, installation of new drainage system, new catch basins for water percolation, incorporating new balanced soil, irrigation system, laser grading, sod, installation of bases, and then completion of the ball field layout. At this time, in fall of 2022, redesign of the project plans were made with modified intent to regrade and rebuild natural turf surface. We have a professional services agreement that's currently being reviewed by the legal department, the city's legal department, with David Volt's design, and we are anticipating final construction documents to be completed within 5 months. Next, we have the Pacific Park Playground and Pool Shade Structure Project. This is $166,000 for the installation of permanent shade structure at 2 playground areas, including 2 shade structures at the community pool deck. I'll get into the status update in the next 2 slides because this is a joint effort with the Pacific Park Splash Pad project. Now, for the splash pad, we have a little over $1 million in CDBG funding. to replace the current splash pad water feature with new splash pad including additional amenities, increased size of the splash pad area by 20%. Current splash pad is 14 years old and needs to be replaced. And then updating the surface, water is filtered, recirculated per LA County public health requirements. So the status update for these two projects, just to give you a background and history, in November of 2022, the project underwent a formal bidding process. In December of 2022, the city received 5 bids. The bids were received and they were deemed unresponsive by the city attorney's office. Therefore, in June of 2023, the city clerk advertised bids yet again. And then on June 14th, the city received 5 bids. And tomorrow at City Council, they are going to be awarding the construction contract to ARC Construction, and project is anticipated to be completed by spring 2024 and will be in use hopefully by summer of 2024. So this project is definitely moving along, hopefully by tomorrow evening. As for the community agency CIP projects, we'll start with the repiping project for Essentia, the Homeless Access Center and shelter. They have a combined $51,000 in funding from 22-23 and 23-24. The scope of work includes replacement and repiping of all rough plumbing, which includes water supply and drain pipes, hot and cold pipes, polyvinyl chloride pipes, rerouting the condensation lines, installation of a new recirculation pump, and then repiping all the horizontal and vertical pipes to prevent rusting. At this time, the agency is going to be providing drawings to the planning department for environmental review. Contract agreement with the city is forthcoming, and the project is expected to be completed in spring of 2024. Verdugo Hills Council on Aging Boy Scouts, they recently received funding. They just purchased the old Charles Music Store building, and they received $92,000 in funding from CDBG just this year. This is the addition. They're going to be doing an ADA compliant vertical wheelchair lift to the interior of the building to provide ADA compliance and access to the second floor. A sidewall mounted lift track mechanism, removal of a few inches of concrete from the slab so lift can rest flush with the floor, drilling into second floor, framing to mount and support the lift, and then running of new electrical supply from the new sub-panel to provide power. Currently, the agency has actually provided us with drawings. We've already submitted the environmental review just this week. And the contract agreement is forthcoming, so we anticipate that the project will be completed by fall of 2024. Now, their project is also in concurrence with their building, which they are going to be handling the reconstruction of. So this is one component of their other construction. Neighborhood Legal Services Public Safety Improvement Project. This project has $120,000 in CDBG funding for the rehab and update of the 20-year-old parking lot, which is adjacent to the Adams Square building. This includes landscaping, parking, concrete curb, paving, demo, replacement of sidewalk, lighting, and then fence and gate operation. Status of this project, agency has to provide us with drawings and submit that to the planning department for environmental review, and the contract agreement is forthcoming. We expect this project to be completed in fall of 2024. Next, we have the repairing and repaving of the parking lot project for Homenetmen Ararat main campus. They were funded $247,000 to repave and repair the parking lot. Now, on August 3rd, they sent us a formal letter requesting to return funds and apply those funds from their roof, to return the funds for the parking lot project and apply them to the roofing and HVAC project that they have from previous CDBG program years. So today, we will be presenting the committee with a report in action item 5B to make that recommendation on this request. Next, we have Lexington CIP building. This is the YWCA of Glendale, their Lexington building. The scope of this project is structural, architectural, and accessibility, mechanical and electrical upgrades throughout, asbestos abatement, removal of existing thermal installation, new HVAC on second floor, and new circuitry at existing electrical panels. Their funding is at about a little under $378,000. Now, the agency has already submitted their drawings to Building and Safety. Dell Architects has been hired. Their contract agreement with the city is actually in the process of being reviewed and approved by the legal department, so their contract is forthcoming. We expect this to be our next project in the pipeline for bidding process, and we expect that this project be completed in the summer of 2024. Alma House CIP project from the Campbell Center. Alma House has been funded a little under $500,000 to replace the kitchen cabinets and counters, replace the laundry cabinets, their 2 bathrooms, a 3/4 bathroom, and then a full remodel of their full bathroom, interior patch and paint, new roof, new wrought iron, earthquake retrofitting. This project is currently in construction, and we anticipate it being completed in the next 2 months. And then we have the restroom renovation project for Home Minutemen. Home Minutemen has $206,000 in restroom renovation funds. Again, I will repeat what I had said. They would like to return the restroom renovation funds in the $206,000 to use them towards their roofing and their HVAC project. Again, we will be bringing this forth to the committee as action item 5B. And then we have the first floor all-inclusive locker room project from the YMCA. This project has a little over $1.1 million from various program years funded with CDBG funding for 11 individually enclosed private showers with a flip bench, new sinks, ADA sink, co-ed locker room, family changing ADA restroom, individually enclosed private toilet compartments. Co-ed locker room will have new benches, lockers, shelf, and mirror for patrons' use. This project is currently in construction, and we anticipate it being completed by October of 2023. We have the Armenian Cultural Foundation's Glendale Youth Center next. They had just finished their solar panel project, so we had asked them to hold until they had energized that system, and now they are working with CDBG to prep the drawings and work with an architect to finalize everything for their planning, for the planning department environmental review. This is going to be $116,000 in CDBG funds for tenant improvement work on their 3rd floor. It's a remodel of the library cafeteria. They want to add a new kitchen, remove existing door, add 3-compartment sink, mop sink, cook stoves, heat pump, boiler, and duct work. So they're looking to complete the project by summer of 2024. And then we have Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities has funding as a phase 1 and a phase 2. They have a community center and roofing project. They have a combined $380,000 in funding, in CDBG funding, for the renovation and repair work of the interior and exterior of the building for phase 1, and then for phase 2, they were going to be doing a project renovation for ADA compliance, replacing fluorescent lighting, and then the demolition and removal of existing roof and installation of a new roof. They too wrote us a letter in August and sending a formal letter requesting to return CDBG funds for phase 1 and phase 2. The reason behind this is they, again, the project came in much higher than anticipated, and what they would like to do is return the funds, come back to the committee in December with a new proposal, reduce their scope of work and focus most likely on the roof only, and submit a proposal in 24-25 to request funding for that, so they get a more accurate estimate. Home Minutemen Ararat Chapter Roofing Project. This is $193,000 in CDBG funding to replace 3 main areas of the roof at the main campus, removal and reinstallation of CDBG-funded solar PV. clean and prep of existing roof with polyurethane spray foam roofing. The agency received a formal bid, and the project came in at $940,000. We have to keep into consideration that this is a roofing project along with the HVAC. It's combined, even though they're two separate projects, but they are they're combined. On August 3rd, again, Home Minutemen sent a letter to the city requesting that they return their funds from the two other projects and focus on the roofing and the HVAC, which are in dire condition and need to be prioritized. They will also be leveraging $200,000 to complete the project. And again, action item 5B will be more detailed, and we'll explain that to the committee. If approved, the City Council, we will expedite the report to City Council in September, and the project will be ready for construction in October or November of this year. Same with HVAC, same situation, and the contractor has explained to the agency that they are ready to start construction in October or November of this year if approved today, and then with the City Council in September. That concludes the CIP update. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Maggie. Ms. Kavarian. Any questions?
Oh, I have one
Mr. Avedisian?
just general question, I think. First of all, thank you for the report, it's very detailed. My only concern, I think I ask this quite often, that do we have any of these projects on the verge of the timeline that it's going off, or it might be an issue, or they would be coming back for extensions and all? Do we have any of these projects? I know we have so many projects last few years that has been delayed for one or the other reasons. And that's basically it.
Yeah, Mr. Avedisian, that's a great question. And could you please explain the actual timeline project again for us before you, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
You're
So
the
that we
boss, I
can.
can't say no to you.
No, no, but we do have so many of them, and I made a note, we have at least 3 of them that, with 16, 17, and then 18, 19 funding. So can you give us the guidelines for the timeline, and then let us know, answer Mr. Avedisian's
Absolutely.
question?
When an agency gets funded on July 1st, they have to start on their drawings and their plans. And they work with Ms. Kabanjian and myself to submit those. When they submit those to us, we do what we call a NEPA review, an environmental review that's required by HUD. We input that, and our planning department makes the review. Now, if the building is over 50 years old, it takes a little bit longer to wait because we have to get a formal letter from the State of California Historical Preservation Office saying that it's okay to move forward with this project and there's no effects to historic preservation. So we move on to the next to the next thing. So when the NEPA review is approved and we are ready for contracts, then comes contract period. So we work with the agency to put their contracts together. During this time, they work on their specifications. If they have an architect, we work with them as well to see where they are with the specifications, and we include all that information into the contract and into the budget. Then we move on to the next phase, which is we call it the AIA agreement. So sorry, I take that back. Before the AIA agreement, we have the bidding phase. So this takes quite a long time. As we've noticed, it's taken us months and months for that. The bidding phase has taken long because we put out a bid notice. The agency puts out a bid notice, has to wait a while to do a bid walk. And then after the bid walk, hopefully people attend the bid walk, because if no one attends the bid walk, you have to put out another bid notice. When you have general contractors come to the bid walk, if you can get at least 2 or 3, then you have at least 1 or 2 who submit an actual proposal, then we're in business. Unfortunately, it's taken us about 2 to 3 times. And usually it takes 2 or 3 times because the second time tends to be a shocker. It's the price shock for most agencies because it comes in so high, and they assume that if they go out again to bid, they might get a better comparison, which ends up being almost the same. That being said, they finally will find out that this is how much something costs, and they will work with a contractor. During this time, what our staff does is to make sure that they are a qualified contractor. So we go into the Department of Industrial Relations and we do our due diligence because we want to make sure that they're qualified and they're registered. After that, the AIA agreement comes to play. So the agency and the contractor decide on a contractual agreement. We have to make sure that the HUD language is in there. We have to make sure that the CDBG pricing is in there as well. And our Davis-Bacon rates, the prevailing wage rates, are included and they're locked in. Once that's done, the pre-construction meeting happens and we can start construction pretty soon after that. So all in all, you're looking at a good 1.5 to 2 year process for everything, the way it's been going. If it was all to be expedited and streamlined, it might take a year, depending on how large of a project it is. But this is where we're at.
And further, the HUD guidelines, though, require that the funding be completed and totally expensed within
7 years.
7 years. Okay, so we are, go ahead, and maybe Mr. Avedisian is right on point, right? Where are we with that 7 year? It looks like the Pacific Grass Project started. Yes.
Chair Quinones Gabriel and members of the committee, I think what you're asking is how many projects do we have that are at risk of potentially losing their funding and how close are we to that? So to answer the question, the efforts that you made at the last meeting to reprogram the funds really saved the city in losing a good chunk of the funds. So at the last meeting, you worked with us and council approved reprogramming funds that were at risk from fiscal year 16-17, and majority of those funds were reprogrammed to the YMCA project, which we are hopeful will be able to spend down the funds, and the city won't be at risk for the September 30 of 2023 deadline that we had in at risk of being lost essentially or being recaptured by U.S. Treasury. So at this time, as of the end of this year, December of 2023, as long as the YMCA project proceeds, and we have no reason to think that they won't, and expends the funds, and we have already received their second invoice, so we are pretty confident that we'll be able to expend and draw down the funds, because it's two steps. It's not just expending the funds, but it's also getting the invoice to the city in order for the city to submit it to HUD to be able to get reimbursed by that deadline. So we staff is confident and is working closely with the Y to make sure that we do get those invoices on time and are able to submit it by September 30th. The next project that would be at risk would be September 30th of next year, which is 2024. And again, the funds that we have at risk are the Splash Pad project, which is in a combination with the structures as well. And we are going to council this week to be able to award a contract to be able to start that project. So staff is also working very closely with Public Works, and Mr. Bulanikian can interject, but we are pretty confident that we'll be able to spend down the portion of the funds that are potentially at risk of being recaptured by September 30th of 2024. Now, anything beyond that, which is 2025, 2026. So if we're looking at September, and to also add, the YMCA project also has funds that would potentially be had to be spent by the September of 2024 deadline. But again, as long as their project proceeds and completes by the end of the year, we shouldn't have any risk with those funds either. The next project that would be at risk would probably be the Ararat HVAC project. The community center project, and again, our splash pad. And I think Maggie's working with Iris to bring up the spreadsheet that could help you see those. So staff is tracking this pretty closely to make sure that if we are at risk and if any of the projects will not be proceeding and will not be able to complete and be able to draw down, that we come back to you and reappropriate the funds, reprogram the funds just like we did for the Y. The last report that we have before you is to set some policy guidelines, asking for feedback from you and recommendations so that we aren't in this type of a situation moving forward. There are a couple of ways to do that, and Ms. Kavarian and I have been, working closely with Mr. Bulanikian to evaluate our processes in the last few years and are bringing you some recommendations to try to avoid that. But right now, at risk would essentially be the YMCA funds and the splash pad project funds, along with the shade structure, which we kind of look at as one project. So those are the two projects that are at risk between this year September and next year September. But staff is pretty confident that we should be able to spend down at least the CDBG portion. The project doesn't have to be completed. It's just the CDBG portion of the funds have to be expended. So even if the project goes beyond the September 30th deadline, as long as the portion that CDBG allocated is expended, we should be fine. So that's kind of the gist. Hopefully that answers the questions you had. But those are the two projects right now that are at risk by September 30th of 2024.
Right, no, I think both were very complete answers.
The other thing I wanted to add, and maybe Ms. Kavarian was going to add too, is, this is the 7-year deadline, but we still have the timeliness, which is basically that HUD expects the city in general to not have more than 1.5 times the award that you have for that current program year. So by 60 days, so by April of 2024, we shouldn't have more than 1.5 times our annual allocation. Our annual allocation is about 1.7 million. And we have slides later on, and when we go through the report, we can look at this in detail. But essentially, we need to be at approximately 2.6 million remaining to spend down by the end of the program year. We are nowhere near. And we have already, and HUD has come to us, the city, and put us on warning. And what we're bringing before you, the last report, is essentially our way of telling HUD the city's working towards addressing those risks, and this is our plan of action. And again, we can go into further detail in those reports, but essentially, the other issue we have is not just the 7-year expenditure, but annually we're supposed to be spending down our funds where we're not accumulating. Right now, we have about $6 million that are essentially in our line of credit, and that is supposed to be at a little over 2 million. So staff does not think that we will be able to spend down that amount, like 4 million in just one program year, but HUD is okay with us having a plan in place to be able to attain that in the next year or so. And so our efforts in putting in policy to make sure we're not in a similar situation and reprogramming funds to be able to spend it down is our way of showing, HUD, and also putting in policy decisions to make sure that we're not in a similar situation going forward. Because the more projects are unable to spend down, the more we have sitting in our line of credit, which means that the federal government will come back and say, you really don't need the money because you're not spending it. So we're going to give you less in future years, and that will impact the amount that Glendale gets in future years.
Yeah, that's I just ask a follow-up question then. Because we're at more than 3 times instead of 1.5, and the policies that we're going to be looking at in the future are future-oriented. What is your plan right now to spend down this money?
So when Chair Quinones Gabrielli and members of the advisory committee, when we met with the Deputy Assistant Secretary, she asked the same question. And we told her that the workout plan, and we were quite honest about it. We said, we presented her with the timeliness schedule that we have, and we showed her what projects were in the pipeline and how much they were worth. And we were confident if we can have a proposed policy agreement today or make recommendations today, we're looking at 25, 26 as being a very positive year, and we're finally caught up. I don't want to say that, I don't want to look at other agencies, but this tends to be a national issue right now. And she was visiting, she's a regional representative, so she was visiting folks from Texas to California. And it seems to be an ongoing issue. And again, it's pandemic related, it's, you know, it's inflation related, and we'll get back into that when we present the report to you. But that being said, we're confident that in 25, 26, we should be on track.
Okay, thank you. So I have Mr. Armenian and then Mr. Garibian. Thank you.
So there's a couple of things that seem to be at play, and I'm just looking for confirmation here. One is obviously the management of the agencies in terms of how they manage their projects. But a theme that we hear from all of them at this point is lack of response in the contractor community in terms of even getting bids, number one. And when they do, one bid, much less multiple bids. And when the bids do come in, like we're going to discuss later on home and men, coming in substantially higher. So it's more of a comment in that I think as we're doing the planning for the next round of funding, I think, and now layer in this whole BABA thing too, which makes it even harder. I think we're going to have to adjust and modify our approach to how we divide up funds, but also kind of how we look at proposals, or even maybe even the RFP process, to frame up a different way to look at how we're asking for the proposals, because otherwise we're going to keep adding to this pipeline. And most of the delays have to do with at least the last several instances where we've had money returned and, you know, or commingle money and all that kind of stuff has been because of increasing inflationary costs, as well as difficulty getting even contractors interested because of all the red tape involved. Now we're going to add some more red tape with the BABA requirements. So we have to do something to help our agencies out here to kind of change our approach moving forward so that we're not just adding to the problem. Just a thought. So welcome kind of thinking. I know you guys don't have all the ideas together today, but as you're thinking about preparations for the RFP process, I would recommend giving some thoughts about what things we might modify this next time around on how we approach this. The committee certainly can consider like whether or not we, you know, focus on less projects so that there's more money, so that we can entice the projects to actually kind of get going. Because when we start to nickel and dime the projects, we always seem to be coming back to, oh, not enough money, contractor's not interested, blah, blah, blah.
Committee Member Armenian, that's actually a very good point, and that is essentially the topic of our discussion for the last item. And we staff are hoping to get direction from you as a board today, actually, and not have to come back, because by the time we come back, not to say we're going to bring back the RFP, so we will still have time to take feedback and incorporate changes if between now and then there is something that, you know, we've discovered, whether it's with the BABA Act or things that you think about after this meeting, you know, that triggers the discussion. But I think staff is looking for that kind of guidance from the committee today so that we could go back and develop it and put it into the RFP. So when we bring back the RFP, you've got something to look at and further advise staff on, yes, let's keep it this way, or no, let's change it up, or let's add more to it. Because really doing it towards the end of the year, it makes it more difficult for us to communicate it to the agencies as well. And those are great points, and we can have a more thorough discussion, you know, for the last item as we talk about the policy recommendations. But those are great points, and I would say that, you know, I think staff also agrees with you that we need to probably focus on awarding more to less agencies. So I know it's difficult because we want to help as many agencies as we can, but really, I don't think we're able to help them in the way that we need to when we give them such a small amount when their bids are coming in so high. So I think if agencies know that, and again, I don't want to get into it now, but if agencies kind of know what the expectation from the city is from the get-go, I think they will do a better job of planning for those years ahead. And so if this year they're not ready and not comfortable with moving forward with that project, they're less likely to ask for money just to hold it, because it's $200,000 that they'll know that they have until they can find the other 600. So we can have a more thorough discussion on the last item, but I do want you to remember today is the day that we'd love some feedback from you as a board, and we know we'll incorporate that into future RFPs.
Thank you. Mr. Garibian.
It is obvious most of these issues, COVID had a lot to do with it. Not being able to work or contractors be outside, or also the price, the inflation, and everything else. As we see in today's economy data, as they're comparing things to 22 versus in 22, they were comparing it to 21. There was a huge difference between the two. So that's, I think overall, yes, we should catch up with this information. But I also see here on Alma House, I mean, I'll look at their date and they're almost done with construction. They got it done pretty fast. So there must be something we should meet with them. What did they do right? They must have done something either before the application or after the application.
Committee member Garibian, what they did was they came back to us and said they couldn't afford the bid that came in, and the committee funded them an additional $300,000 because they returned Hamilton House funds that they had.
But
So
timing-wise, not funding-wise, but timing-wise.
they really were aggressive in trying to get the Alma House project completed so they could have gotten to the Hamilton House project. But when they saw the bid process and they saw how much the bids were coming in at, they knew that they weren't going to be able to do both projects. Therefore, they returned the Hamilton House projects and they were able to move forward with the Alma House.
I mean, we have agencies that dollar is not the issue. Timing has been the issue. Not necessarily they're behind schedule. Even the YWCA right now, they're within their time frame. I mean, they're okay, and apparently they already submitted the plans, right? So that's pretty fast.
That is correct.
So it's not necessarily the dollar amount, it's just they move faster. Maybe we should interview them, how do they move slightly faster? Having more money, I don't think speeds up the process.
Committee member Garibian, I think Alma House was funded originally in fiscal year 21-22, so it still took them what Maggie said, which is over a year and a half to get to that point. We funded them a second time, but the original funding that they received, so when they would have started with their project, would have been back in 21-22 probably. So it still did take them.
No, I'm comparing to the list I have, 21-22. There's a lot of agencies on this forum, but none of them are close to this one that they're finishing construction.
They're all,
Sorry, can I add something? For Alma House, we still went out bidding 3 times. It is a residential project, roofing and repairs in the kitchen area, so it depends on the scale of the project as well.
Of course.
But we did go on 3 times bidding and finding a contractor to work on the project. They're almost there. They're doing some retrofitting work, and they're done with the roofing. Now they're working on the interior.
Right, it says they should be done with construction by
Yes.
November 22.
Yeah, it's a very small residential project.
As far as the which one was it? Catholic Charities. Do we have the bid, how much over it was? Did they give it to us?
So for the Catholic Charities project, their third bid came in. The first one came in at a little under 1.3 million, 1.285. And then the second bid came in at $875,000.
And their budget was?
About 200, I believe 288,000. 58?
So about 250 change to almost $1 million, 800. And just because of inflation mainly?
Inflation and the time that they spent with the bid process and being closed and COVID and all that.
So the chances of us having problem with most of the agencies going to be the same. I mean, these people are gonna be coming back because the dollar amount, if it's 5 times fold, is not something that it's only one agency problem or the second. So moving forward, which is our item that we're gonna discuss later, these are the stuff we need to make sure that we have solid numbers. Again, COVID was a major factor, so I don't blame them because a lot changed after COVID. But moving forward, I think we should be more solid on getting those. And again, a lot of you explained the timeline. Maybe some of the stuff we can push before the application process for them to be more ready, which again, it's an item we'll discuss later on, but I think we should be able to save some time. Thank you.
Yes, yes, Ms.
Follow-up
Manukian.
question. I'm wondering if any of the agencies have reported any delays in the planning and permit process, which, you know, the city has control over.
There's always delays because architects do get red marks from the planning department, from building and safety. So there's a going back and forth of updating drawings. So when we are ready to go out on bidding phase, we need to have a 90% complete set of set drawings, so that contractors have almost the final set. So yeah, there is a communication of going back and forth, maybe 4 months of updating the drawings.
My question is specifically, is it worse now than it was before in terms of the timing of getting through plan check and getting permits?
The committee member, Manukian, members of the advisory committee, the planning department has a new system in place, an online system in place that they're still working out the kinks on. They have informed us that because our agencies are with CDBG funded projects, that they're going to try and expedite our projects. So we are in communication with them. So these projects will hopefully move forward in the pipeline. And I know that Ms. Kabanjan has a very good rapport with that department. So we are trying to figure out ways to expedite the process. But at this time, because of this online system that they have that they're trying to work out, that could also cause some delay.
That's excellent news that you're actually helping. Thank you.
Very good. Anything else? These are great observations.
I just want to say thank you for the
Yes.
report, for the detail, for all of the step. I think I can't open the can of worms, and it was a learning process too at the same time. That one question brought out all this exact details information. So thank you.
Thank you. Great observations too from the committee, and thank you, staff. Very good report. And let's go to the next one then, D.
4D is year-end performance report for fiscal year 2022-2023 social services programs.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Hamad Kabanjan, our administrative associate, who will present the Public Social Services year-end performance report.
Okay, good afternoon. We have more reports to present to you, but it's all good because you get to see how CDBG funding has been spent down, as well as how many participants and how much of a residents agencies have assisted. First agency to present to you is Essentia, Homeless Outreach Case Management Program. Proposed number to be served was 30 individuals. Agency has overachieved and assisted 39 individuals. Funds awarded was $20,977. Agency has expanded their fundings. The two outcomes are the following. The first is by the end of the fiscal year, 30 individuals contacted by Homeless Outreach will enroll in Essentia's Access Center. Year-end status to report to you is 33. Agency's goal was 23. As you can see, agency has overachieved. Second outcome, by the end of the fiscal year, 15 out of 30 individuals enrolled in the Access Center will access mainstream resources such as food stamps, job training, employment, substance abuse treatment, and healthcare. Year-end status to report to you is 19. Agencies was 15. Second agency is Catholic Charities of Los Angeles, Glendale Community Center Luz and Fishes Program. Proposed number to be served is 35 households. Agency has overachieved and assisted 84 households. CDBG funding was $25,977. Agency has expended 100%. The two outcomes are the following. The first is of the 35 households served by program, 26 of households will receive aid in the form of goods from the food pantry, rental assistance program, and/or utility assistance program within 3 months of entering the program. Agency has assisted 84. Their goal was 26. They have overachieved 323%. Second outcome is of the 35 households served by the program, 31% households will maintain an active link to accelerated services, including mainstream resources, health and mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse, employment services, and legal services. Year-end status to report to is 30. Agency's goal was 7. Okay, next agency is Glendale Youth Alliance, Youth Employment Program. Proposed number to be served is 20 youth. Actual number served is 21 youth. CDBG funding is $20,977. Agency has expended 100%. The two outcomes are the following. The first is of the 20 youth served, 20 youth will earn income by working a minimum of 100 hours. Year-end status to report is 21. Agency's goal was 20. Second outcome of the 20 youth served, 20 will be assisted and 6 youth will be referred to community agencies based on individual needs. Year-end status to report to 7. Agency's goal was 6. Okay, next agency is Home Again LA. For housing support for homeless families. Proposed number to be served to is 30 households. Actual number served, what agency has overachieved by assisting 33 households. Funds awarded was $10,977. Agency has expended their fundings. The two outcomes are the following. The first is by the end of the fiscal year, of the 30 unallocated households served by the program, 20 will be enrolled in crisis housing within the first 30 days of connecting to Home Again LA. Year-end status to report to is 33. Agency's goal was 20. Second outcome is by the end of the fiscal year, of the 30 unallocated households served by the program, 20 will transition into stable housing within 12 months. Year-end status to report to is 13. Agency's goal was 20. Next agency we have is Door of Hope, Mental Health and Case Management Services for Survivors of Domestic Violence. Proposed number to be served, 32 participants. Actual number served is 42. Funds awarded is $25,977. Agency has overachieved with their numberings as well as expended their fundings. The two outcomes are the following. The first is of the 32 adults, children, and teens served by the program, 24 program participants will report improved mental health as indicated by decreased anxiety and/or depression in adults and increased socio-emotional growth and coping skills in children and teens by ways of assessments by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report to is 33. Agency's goal was 24. Second outcome is of the 22 adults served by the program, 16 program participants will increase their income and/or savings as measured by case managers on a quarterly basis. Year-end status to report to is 19. Agency's goal was 16. Next is Housing Rights Center for Glendale Fair Housing Program. Proposed number to be served was 350 households. Actual number served is 391 households. Agency has expended their 100% of their grant money of $20,000. The two outcomes are the following. The first is HRC will host 2 housing rights workshops for the city of Glendale, one for tenants and one for landlords, and will measure the effectiveness of the workshop throughout the use of survey evaluation forms, demonstrating 85% of attendees will rate the workshop as being useful. Year-end status to report to is 2. Agency's goal was 2. Second outcome, the subrecipient will file 7 fair housing complaints by Glendale residents and successfully concealed 4 fair housing opened cases for investigation by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report use 4, agency's goal was 4. We have our next agency, which is Armenian Relief Society of Western USA for Community Outreach Project. Proposed number to be served is 156 individuals. Agency has overachieved by assisting 164 individuals. Funds awarded was $50,977. Agency has expended 100% of their grant money. The 2 outcomes are the following. The first is of the 80 seniors that enrolled in ESL A classes, at least 76 individuals will complete the curriculum and increase their English language proficiency determined by way of recorded monthly, oral, and written assessments by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report use 80. Agency's goal was 76. Second outcome, of the 36 households who received employment services, 22 individuals will secure employment above the minimum wage by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report use 14. Agency's goal was 22. Next is Committee for Armenian Students and Public Schools, CASPS, for Intervention Prevention Clinical Group Counseling. Proposed number to be served was 44 students. Agency has assisted 43 students. Funds awarded was $30,977. Agency has expended all of their fundings. The 2 outcomes are the following. First is of the 44 students served at 2 sites, 35 will show significant reduced incidence of aggressive behavior by the end of the fiscal year by way of pre and post test. Year-end status to report use 35, goal was 35. Second outcome is of the 44 students served at 2 sites, 35 will show significant improvement in following directions and academic responsibilities by way of psychologist notes, progress reports to show students' progress throughout the program activities by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report use 35, agency's goal was 35. Next, we have a Salvation Army. The People's Choice Market, proposed number to be served was 200 individuals. Agency has overachieved and assisted 239 individuals. Agency has spent down their fundings of $20,977. The 2 outcomes are the following. The first is of the 200 program participants enrolled in the People's Choice Market, 200 will be extremely low and moderate income participants. Year-end status to report use 237. Their original goal was 200. Second outcome is of the 200 program participants enrolled in the People's Choice Market, 100 participants will be elderly, 65 years or older. Year-end status to report to use 116. Agency's goal was 100. Next agency is YWCA, Glendale of Pasadena Mental Health Services for Survivors of Domestic Violence. Proposed number to be served was 25 students. Agency has overachieved by assisting 54 students. Agency has expended their fundings of $25,977. The 2 outcomes are the following. The first is of the 15 women served by the program, 100% will complete the 12-week support group program by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report is 37. Agency's goal was 15. As you can see, it's 247 accomplished. Second is of the 10 children served by program, 8 children will complete 15 individuals counseling sessions by the end of the fiscal year. Status to report use 8. Agency's goal was 8. Next, we have Armenian Bar Association for pro bono clinical legal services. Proposed number to be served was 12 individuals. Actual number served was 35. Agency has overachieved. Funds awarded was $15,977. The 2 outcomes are the following. Of the 12 participants served by the clinical, 9 participants will receive resolution to their matter by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status to report to you is 26. Agency's goal was 9. A second outcome, 80% of attendees of the webinar workshop rate the workshop as being useful as measured through the use of survey evaluation from polls demonstrating the workshop's effectiveness by the end of the fiscal year. Year-end status report used 100 ratings. Agency's goal was 80%. Please let me know if there's any questions.
Wow, Ms. Kabanjan, that's a lot of information, but good. And
Good
it looks like
information.
almost every one of our organizations has, the need is out there, and they have really overachieved. Any questions, comments?
I have.
Yes.
I just want to say thank you. A lot of information, but great. I appreciate it.
The comment, I'm really proud of the agencies and their performances. The money was well spent. They spent it down and provided services beyond expectations. So very pleased with that.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We go to our next item.
Next on the agenda is item 5, action items at AS Program Planning Schedule for the fiscal year 2024-2025, CDBG ESG and Home Annual Action Plan. 1 is motion to review and approve the program planning schedule for the fiscal year 2024-2025, CDBG ESG and Home Annual Action Plan.
Very good. Ms. Kavarian.
Thank you. Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, we've already started our planning process for 24-25, and we have a very short presentation for you. Just to break it down and break down our brand new year that's coming up. Again, this is the 5th year of a 5-year consolidated plan cycle. So this will be our last year of program planning for 2020 to 2025. So program planning schedule, from July through September, we start our conducting data analysis of the American Community Survey. We prepare and make announcements of upcoming community meetings for community agencies and residents to attend. And then, of course, today we're meeting to review and approve the 24-25 Annual Action Plan calendar. In September, we're going to be hosting our CDBG Open House on September 6th. This is via Teams at 11 a.m. We're also going to be hosting an in-person community meeting at the Pacific Park Community Center on October 4th at 7 p.m. We're also offering and continuing with virtual community meetings, which will be scheduled the day after on October 5th via Teams for those who can't attend in person. And then we're going to come back and resume our CDBG Advisory Committee meeting on October 23rd to approve the program priorities for the new year, to approve the proposed funding allocation plan. We're also going to review and approve the fiscal year 24-25 RFP instructions and applications packet for both social services as well as CIP and capital improvement. And then in November, we will be going to the City Council and Housing Authority meeting on November 14th to approve the 24-25 program priorities funding allocation, and then we'll authorize the issuance of an RFP. Staff will publish the 24-25 RFP notice. Mid-November, we usually do this. We invite prospective applicants to our technical assistance workshop. We're going to host that on November 29th of this year. And then in December, on December 28th, we will have the deadline to turn in proposals. This year, Ms. Alexanian and I have been working on having these proposals be turned in online. So we might be transitioning, if we can get our contracts done, to a new system of online proposal submission and review. So we will definitely get back to the committee, most likely in October, if we have that in the pipeline by then. And then in January of 2024, staff will be reviewing and analyzing the funding proposals, and then creating a strengths and weaknesses analysis that we send out to the community agencies. And then we're going to receive those responses from those community agencies if they have any weaknesses. And then in February, we put those packets together for the CDBG Advisory Committee and distribute those for your review. This is where the real work comes in. And then we also prepare project descriptions for submission to our Community Development's Planning Department for the CEQA environmental review at that time. And then in March, we will be hosting two CDBG Advisory Committee meetings. One will be on March 1st, and that will be for Public Social Services. And depending on how many CIP projects we get, proposals that we get, we will resume and meet again on March 4th for the CIP portion of the interviews. March 6th, what we do is we publish the list of recommendations made by the Advisory Committee for fiscal year 24-25. And then in April, we will be hosting a public meeting regarding the project recommendations made by the committee at the Pacific Park Community Center. In May, we go before City Council and Housing Authority to meet and approve the final funding recommendations for 24-25 for the CDBG ESG and Home Annual Action Plan. During this time, we publish a 30-day comment period for the approved plan. And then staff will conduct a program and financial monitoring of CDBG-funded agencies to review in this year's 23-24 projects. In June, we submit the annual action plan to HUD, and then on July 1st, we start the whole process all over again. So this is our program planning schedule for this year, the upcoming year, I should say. Any questions on that?
Very good. Any questions? All right, got a lot of work ahead. Thank you. What is next then?
Madam Chair, this is an action item, and we're requesting a motion.
Okay, may I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the program planning schedule for fiscal year 2024-2025 CDBG, ESG, and Home Annual Action Plan.
Second.
Thank you.
Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Caribbean,
Yes.
Manukian,
Yes.
Vice Chair Avedisian,
Yes.
and Chair Quinones Gabrielian.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
5B is reprogramming $454,018 in returned fiscal year 2021-2022 and fiscal year 2023-2024 capital improvement project funds from Homenetmen Ararat. One is motion providing direction to staff on reprogramming the $454,018 in return CDBG capital improvement project funds from Homenetmen Ararat at A, restroom CIP MC Home Ararat 2122 for $206,518. And B is parking lot, main campus Home Ararat, Homenetmen Ararat 2324, $247,500.
Thank you. Is it Ms. Kavarian? Okay.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, we touched upon this item 5B, regarding reprogramming of Homenetmen Ararat projects. I have a short presentation for you to kind of go through the projects and make those recommendations to the committee. So just to give a bird's eye view of what projects that Homenetmen Ararat has in the pipeline for CIP. They have 2019-2020 HVAC project at $95,000. They have 2020 funds for the roofing project at $193,000. They have 2021 funds for the restroom project at $206,000 that they would like to cancel. And then they have 2023 funds for their parking lot project at $247,000 that they'd like to cancel. All in all together, they have $742,401 in CDBG funding. So to give the committee a background on the status of the roof and the HVAC project. So the roof and the HVAC project went out to bid together 3 times. On their first bid attempt in March, they had 3 contractors attend the bid walk and no bids were submitted by the due date. Second bid attempt was at the end of March, and 1 contractor attended the bid walk, and again, no bids were submitted by the due date. By the 3rd bid attempt in July, They had 2 contractors attend the bid walk, and then they had 1 qualified bid that was submitted by Bedrock Group Incorporated for $940,000. So the CDBG CIP bid results of the $940,000. When we looked at the bid proposal, the costs reflect current market bid pricing based on square footage. Staff actually looked at square footage, and we did our own cost analysis for it because we wanted to be certain that this was, because there was only 1 bid submitted, we also wanted to do our due diligence. The proposal noted that additional roof repairs were made after years of leaks and temporary patch jobs. So this increased the bid amount because a lot more work would have to take place to repair the roof, because I believe, and I'm sure Mr. Gorkoskin will explain it further, I think the patch jobs are causing more work for the contractor in the long run. And then upgrading to current code requirements, rewiring of the gas lines, replacing the 5 HVAC systems that are in critical condition, and then the removal and reattachment of existing solar panels. And for the committee members who weren't with us in previous years, Homenetmen Adat chapter has solar panels on the main campus roof, which were paid for by CDBG dollars. So they have to be removed. The roof has to be repaired, and those solar panels have to be reattached. So to explain, the agency requests to return the funds and apply to other CDBG projects. On August 3rd, Homenetmen Adat notified city staff by letter that the agency would like to cancel 2 of their CDBG-funded projects, the restroom and the parking lot project, that totals $454,000 together. They'd like to apply that $454,000 to the HVAC and roofing project, which currently has $288,000. And then they would like to leverage an additional $197,000 to complete the roof and HVAC project. So if you take the $454,000 and the $288,000 and the $197,000 in leverage, that'll bring them up to the $940,000 to get the work done. And then we have to look at it in this way, because it's 2 projects. Remember, it's the roofing project as well as the HVAC project. So the Homenetmen restroom project, which totals $206,000, would be split. $104,000 would go to the HVAC and $101,000 would go to the roof. And the remaining $247,000 in the parking lot project would be dedicated to the roofing project. So the staff recommendations and reprogramming of these return funds. There is no fiscal impact related to reprogramming return funds mid-year. Staff is able to write a report and move it along to City Council if approved. We do want to bring to your attention, and as Mr. Avedisian had asked about the period of performance, CDBG funds have to be expended before the 7-year period of performance is due. And just to let the committee know that the HVAC project is the one that's in, I guess, the first one in the pipeline to be completed, but the funds need to be expended by September 30th of 2026. Gives us a little bit of wiggle room, but you do have to realize that that's where we're at this point. Reprogramming of funds to roofing and HVAC will also help to alleviate our timeliness issue. CDBG timeliness requirement to spend down funds, balance no greater than 1.5 times that of our annual grant, as Ms. Alexanian had explained earlier. We are concerned that we don't want HUD to reduce our next year's grant allocation. So if we are timely, that also helps. So it's important to make sure that funds are awarded to programs and agencies they'll be able to spend down their funds. We are aware that the implementation timeline is as follows. If you do review this report and make the recommendation to reprogram the funds, staff would present this report to the City Council in September. And in October of 2023, agency is ready to begin the roof construction with Bedrock Group because they have already given their the green light that they will be able to do it. They'd like to do it before the rainy season, even though we had that storm last week. They'd like to get it started before the rainy season, which is late October.
Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you so much.
And
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
I'm sorry,
Avedisi.
and then, of course, Board Member Serge Garkasian's here if you have any additional questions from home men themselves.
Good, thank you. Thank you for attending.
Thank you for the report. Just to make sure I understood correctly, so the project, if this funds are approved, the project is ready to go, the plans, everything, permits, everything is done. As soon as the approval by the committee, suggestion by the committee and approval by the council, they can start pretty much next day or whatever the timeline is. Is that correct?
Ms. Alexanian might have a comment? No?
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, Committee Member Avedisian, I was shaking my head no in the sense of it still needs to go to council. So as long as it's approved by council, I'll let Mr. Serge come up and address your questions as far as how far along in the process are they, unless Ms. Kavarian has the answer.
Sure, please.
Please
Mr.
join
Gar-
us then.
I know that
Thank
Mr.
you.
Garkasian was going to meet with the contractor, so you probably have an update.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Well, we talked to the contractor. I had a meeting with him last week, and he mentioned that he's ready to go. So that's why I mentioned a few times that if it's approved, we can start immediately. Now, there probably will be some paperwork as far as contract, legal issues and so forth, but we're ready to go, and it's kind of planned already if it's approved. So we're just waiting for the approval.
This is also a different process. It's a design and build. So contractor needs to work on the design as he is building at the same time. So he needs to work with the city of LA to get the permits as he is working on the construction side of it. So nothing can be done ahead of time with the department itself. So
Yeah.
contractor has the knowledge with the city of LA to start with the processing
Okay,
If
let
as
me
soon
just-
as it's approved.
Thank you. I just wanted again to understand it correctly, because my mind now is just, I just heard couple different things. So the project within our city-wise, unless, once this committee approves it, goes to the city council, and city council approves it, from there, then there is a lack that we need to wait, or they need to wait, the contractor needs to wait or process with city of LA, and then start the construction. So there's still, the contractor has to go to the city of LA for the additional permits or whatnot, and then start the
Yes.
project. So we're still talking about maybe a couple more months, the project?
Well, design and build is a different phase. It's design and build is you are working with the city as you are building, so there's no wait time. So it's not like permit set, you are waiting on the red marks, updating, having the final set, and then working on construction. That's a different phase. What Home Admin is doing a design and build.
I see, okay, as they go.
Yeah.
So the process as they go. Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Mr. Caribian.
Hello.
Yeah.
Mr. Carver, you mentioned the square footage. I don't see it on my paperwork. How many square feet of roof are we covering with this dollar amount?
31,000.
I think about
31,000.
31,000, yeah.
That's,
The roof, yeah.
okay, it says 3 main areas. Is that changed or still 3 main
Yeah,
areas?
3 main areas.
3 main areas. So 31,000, I would say it's 30% of the entire thing. If it's 3, I mean, how is the main, so you're not changing the entire roof, you're only changing,
No, it's the whole, we're saying 3 main areas because the way the roof is structured, but it's
are
just
you
one.
replacing the entire
Yeah,
roof?
it's the whole
You're
thing.
not patching?
No, I hopefully not.
It's not like 3 areas, I fix this area, not the other area?
No.
So
It's the
you're
whole roof.
replacing the entire roof?
Yeah.
Okay, that was my main, just clarification, just
No,
to
it's
be
the
sure,
entire roof,
because it's
yeah.
not clear the way it's written. And obviously, 1 stone, 2 bird, I guess, because of timelessness and also, so, thank you, that's all the question.
All right.
Any other questions?
So I just want to make sure, just because it's such a leap in price, that staff feels that you've done all the due diligence, since we're only looking at one bid, that this is a reasonable bid as well. I guess the question is also to you. I know there's been difficulty in getting bids, which always surprises me, but I know there's a lot of bureaucracy involved, so a lot of contractors don't want to get
Right.
involved in these projects. So, but I just want to make sure we're comfortable given the pretty exponentially more costs we're looking at for this.
Committee Member Armenian, that's a very good question. Luckily, and maybe unluckily for Catholic Charities, they also have a roof project, and they also had their bids come in around the same time as Home and Edmonds. So we looked at their pricing, because they had two bids that came in. And when we broke it down, Ms. Kabanjan and I, and then I broke it down with a fellow colleague of mine who knows Home and Edmond very well, we realized that this is the going rate. We actually realized that these are the numbers, these are the new numbers.
And if I can add, we also had some estimates from contractors who would not do the CDBG, project. And the estimates were about 600 to 650,000, which is about right. Once you add the prevailing wages and all that, it goes up to almost 25-30%.
Oh,
Wow.
Just to, sorry. Just one that earlier that I asked for the Catholic Charities, just for same reason it is 6,000 square feet. So I was gonna compare that, granted they had more work to do, but square feet per roof line, $1 million for them from 250. So
Correct.
that gives us a direction pretty much.
Last question I had, just for as a point in time reference, we just had storms last weekend, a week ago. Kind of what was the situation with the
Not
center?
good. We had probably over a dozen, areas that were leaking. And again, during the last 4 or 5 years, it just got deteriorated, it got worse. So it's kind of urgent, so we would appreciate,
I-
all the help we can get.
Thank
Well,
you.
I have one final question,
Sure.
because the whole project is also counting on 197,000
Right.
funding by Home and Edmond. How is that? How do you feel very positive about raising the funds?
Yes.
Or do you already have them in hand?
We have some, and then we'll raise more. And it's something that needs to be done, and it will be done. Yeah, I am pretty confident. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Well, then, may I have a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion.
Yes. Okay, to approve the
Approve
reprogramming. Go
As
ahead.
proposed by the staff.
Very good. And that is reprogramming $454,018 in returned fiscal year 21-22 and 23-24 capital improvement project funds from Home and Edmond Ararat as specified by staff to the HVAC and roofing project. Is there a second, please?
I'll second that.
Roll call.
Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Caribbean,
Yes.
Manukian,
Yes.
Vice Chair Avedisian,
Yes.
and Chair Quinones Gabrielian.
Yes. Okay, thank you and congratulations.
Let's get to work
Yeah. Timing is everything.
before
5C.
the price goes up again.
Next is 5C, Community Development Block Grant, CDBG, Proposed Policy Recommendations for Community Agencies Submitting Proposals for Capital Improvement Project, CAP funding. One is motion providing direction to staff on proposed policy recommendations for community agencies who submit proposals for capital improvement project funding.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the committee, as we've been talking throughout the last several years and with these few items, over the last few years, staff has observed, and so have you, that there are challenges that we have observed with the administering the CDBG funds, and more so with the timeliness and the U.S. Treasury spending deadline. So in reviewing some of the challenges that we have faced, we put together a report for you and have some recommendations for policy direction. These are staff recommendations. These aren't, set in stone, but we'd love for you to review them with us, provide some guidance, whether you agree with staff's recommendation and or help us modify or add to, additional policies that you may have thought about or think about as we have this discussion, in order for us to ensure that we provide clear guidance to the agencies when we put out the request for proposal process in the next fiscal year. So these would be implemented essentially for the fiscal year 24-25 process. Some of the guidance that we are bound by are the timeliness, which we've talked about. So timeliness is measured by the rate of expenditure of funds in the line of credit for the city of Glendale. So for us, the city should not have more than 1.5 times the annual grant remaining in the line of credit 60 days prior to the end of the program year. So the program ends on June 30th. So essentially, as of April, we are not supposed to have more than 1.5 times the amount that we are allocated as a city, which is about 1.7 million. So 1.5 times 1.7 would be about 2.6 million. So essentially, by the end of April 30th, we should only have 2.6 remaining in our line of credit, which means we've spent down the rest of the funds. About $4.2 million essentially would need to be spent down in order for us to meet that timeliness. Now, having said this, the city has not met its timeliness requirement in the last, I want to say, 2 years, and HUD does send a letter to the city and asks staff for what's your plan to meet that requirement. Now, with the pandemic and COVID, and with CARES Act coming in, so HUD hasn't been as strict, and Glendale's not alone. This is a nationwide issue, and we're not the only city that's not meeting the requirements. And as Ms. Kavarian mentioned, we did meet with HUD representatives a couple of weeks ago, and they echoed that this is an issue that they're seeing across various cities. But again, the city would like to, the city and staff would like to set some policy guidelines so that we're able to better meet that requirement going forward. The second item, or the limitation that the city has, is the 7-year expenditure, the U.S. Treasury grab, as we call it. So within 7 years of the allocation, the city must spend down the money. So with this limitation, or this deadline, which is September 30 of each year, we have no control over it. So HUD doesn't have control over it, and HUD doesn't want to see the U.S. Treasury grab the funds because, again, when they look at the budget, when they're looking at the federal budget, if they see that there is money that's sitting out there and is not getting expended, it's really difficult for them to say, no, the cities need this money, the low-income families and the low-income areas of various cities need these funds. So it's really hard for HUD representatives to even advocate for more funding when it shows that there's money sitting out there and the cities are not spending it down. They do understand that there's various factors that contribute to this, but nonetheless, when money's sitting in a savings account essentially somewhere, they feel like, well, why should we give you more money? So it's really up to all of us as a whole to be able to spend down the funds so that we could advocate to get more funds for the agencies and for the programs that we offer. Some of the things that staff have observed, it's in evaluating proposals from the agencies and looking at, the number of projects that we have in the timeline coming from various agencies, the increases in the project costs, and of course the timeliness in agencies, including the city, being able to spend down the funds, all kind of contribute to the issue that we have at hand. So in breaking it down further, with proposal evaluations, something that staff has noticed is that oftentimes agencies submit proposals that are incomplete. So they have missing documents, whether it's their tax forms, their nonprofit status, contractor estimates. And so in the past, staff has been pretty flexible, and agencies have multiple opportunities to correct and to ask staff for guidance. So at this time, we feel that the combination of all the things that add up to having an incomplete application should potentially lead to disqualifying an agency. Budget requests not matching project proposals. So oftentimes when we review their budget request, agencies will submit one thing on their budget document, but in reading the project description, the numbers don't add up. And of course, as you're aware, the staff does review the proposals before you as a body review it. And we provide the strength and weakness analysis where we identify for agencies the areas in their proposal that need to be revised or don't make sense, and we ask for clarification and revisions. Another area that we've seen is the lack of proper construction estimates reflecting prevailing wage rates. Well, if their project estimates, their contractor estimates are not accurate, it leads to these types of situations where they come to you and say, we need $500,000 for our project, but then when they actually go out to bid, it's really a $900,000 project. So if their estimates are not close to being accurate, then essentially the proposal is not complete or accurate in reflecting the actual cost of the project, which doesn't give you the right information in order to be able to make an informed decision. Project readiness is not clear or reflected in the application, so sometimes we don't really know where in the project process they are. And so these are several things the staff has identified in reviewing the applications that we feel are either delaying the projects or bringing forth the project to you for consideration, which sometimes puts you in an awkward situation, as we saw in this last funding cycle, where you really want to work with the agencies because they do great work and you want to give them the opportunity to be funded for the project, yet they're not complete applications, and sometimes you don't have all the information at hand to make the decision. And so we want to make sure that we don't bring forth projects that maybe shouldn't be considered. And if we as staff are giving the agencies opportunities to correct these and they're still not getting corrected, then we disqualify the application and don't even bring it forth to you for review. And there's various opportunities for agencies to ask questions. We have the technical assistance meeting. We have staff available by phone and email, throughout the proposal process, throughout the RFP process, and we also do the strengths and weakness analysis where we send the agencies, here are the areas that you need to improve and revise. And if after all of that, the agencies are still not submitting complete applications, one policy recommendation is to just disqualify the proposal. Where an agency fails to properly respond and correct for the weaknesses in their applications, which were identified in the strengths and weaknesses. So if staff is already identifying that these are areas that you need to revise before we consider your proposal, and the agencies are not taking that opportunity to correct that, then we would like to just disqualify that proposal and not we'll of course send it to you for review, but the strength and weakness analysis will identify that this was disqualified after thorough review. The next area that we have are the number of projects in the pipeline. So agencies with multiple projects in the pipeline lead to timeliness issues, and the inability to complete a project equals to the inability if agencies are not able to complete their projects, they're unable to spend down their funds, which then leads to the timeliness issue in being able to spend down the funds. So staff is recommending that agencies cannot be funded for more than 2 CIP projects at any one time and can only submit a proposal for a second CIP project if their first project that's already funded is in construction and will be completed within a year of the application date. Essentially, what we're trying to do is limit agencies from applying for multiple project funding without moving forward the projects. So if a project is funded in the current year, so by the time the next cycle comes around in December, where proposals are due, if we don't anticipate that original project that is currently funded is going to be completed by June of that year, then they shouldn't even bother submitting a proposal, because for multiple reasons. One, it allows them to focus on the current project that they have at hand. And two, it allows other agencies the opportunity, if they are already ready and able to proceed with their project, the ability to get funded and at a higher level. So we're not trying to limit agencies or not fund agencies, but we're just trying to maybe prioritize and give them equal opportunity, that if you already have a project, focus on completing that project. And if you're almost done with completing that project, then submit a new proposal, because by the time you finish that project, by the time we go through our process with your review, with council review, by the time July 1st comes around, that project will be completed by December of that year. So it essentially gives them about 6 months of overlap with the old project that's funded and the new project that needs to get started in their planning phase. So essentially, no agency should be funded for more than 2 projects at any given time. That's the policy recommendation. The next 2 items kind of go hand in hand, which is the increase in project costs and the timeliness issue in the projects being completed. So project costs, as we've all seen, have increased for various reasons, whether it's the pandemic, and some of them are you know, they kind of overlap. You know, rising material costs, BABA Act is going to contribute to that even further. Rising labor costs with minimum wage increasing, it's of course impacting, you know, the domino effect. It's increasing wages for higher positions, and of course the construction industry is no different. And all of this combined, you know, the inflation issue that we're dealing with. Project cost estimates, if they're not accurate, it essentially leads to project costs going up. So if agencies are getting one contractor estimate and it's not as accurate as it should be, we've got nothing to compare it to if it's one estimate. So we assume that it's accurate, but for multiple reasons. I mean, it may be accurate at the time of submission, but sometimes it may not be accurate. And if we don't have multiple estimates to compare, we really don't have a good base to verify whether that is close to what it should be as far as the project cost. And of course, the delays in project starting are also leading to price increases, resulting in budget shortfalls. And you know, if the project is not ready to start when awarded, then by the time they get to that point where they go out to bid, we're seeing that the project costs have increased and they're needing more money. So it's like this domino effect. So one of the things that we're proposing, and we've been asking for this, but we haven't necessarily been strict on it, is that proposals should include a minimum of 2 general contractor estimates that reflect prevailing wage rates. Otherwise, they will be disqualified. So we know that there is a challenge, and we know that the agencies are saying that they're unable to get general contractor estimates. But we think that this is necessary, and it's not all of them that are not able to get it, so some are. So I think we'd like to put this in as a policy decision and then work with agencies to see how we can better assist and how we can help them to be able to at least secure 2 general contractor estimates and making sure that those estimates are at prevailing wage rates in order to have an accurate estimate for you to consider for funding. The next recommendation, which kind of helps address this, is a commitment to the timely completion of CIP projects reflected in the necessary completion of project planning and design phases. So staff is proposing that, you know, the proposal should reflect project readiness and completion or near completion of the following pre-construction activities. So before the agencies apply for funding, we're hoping, and not every project is the same. So some projects, you know, may need a feasibility study, but some may not. But what this essentially is saying is if your project needs a feasibility study, we want to make sure that you've already completed that before you even come to us for funding. Conceptual designs are ready to go, so don't come ask for funding before you even know what your project entails, because oftentimes you need your conceptual design to even know what your project scope, you know, what your project scope is. Pre-schematic work, schematic documents and plan documentation, technical consulting, construction documents and specifications are ready to go We don't necessarily want them to be finalized, because if funded, then the prevailing wage language or the BABA Act language needs to also go into the specs, but they should be pretty complete in a draft form so that we know that the agency has done the legwork to ensure that, this is a project that they absolutely need and they are serious about moving forward and they need the funds in order to be able to move forward. So if a project is absolutely necessary, the facility is in dire condition, there's safety concerns, there's need for improvement to be able to provide the services, then those projects should essentially be planned and proceed regardless of the CDBG funding. This kind of assists the agencies to be able to get to that point faster. So we want to make sure that, the agencies are at a point in the project where we know there aren't going to be further delays. It's not to limit the agencies, but it's really to help them as well. Because if they get to a point, for example, in the case of if the roof was in that condition, and if they were further along and able to figure out, well, this is the cost of the project, they would have probably not come to us for funding for their restrooms or something else. They would have come for more funding for the roof project. Similarly to the Catholic Charities, like they're in a similar situation. If they were further along in their process and they realized, wow, this is really going to cost me more, but this is something I need to do regardless of whether CDBG funds me. So I'm going to go out and get to that point in the project process where I know, this is what my cost is and this is what I realistically need to do. And if I can't afford it, then I'm going to scale it back and I'm going to go to the advisory committee with a more attainable plan of action. So we feel that this will probably bring forth projects that are better prepared and more realistic in the need. How high of a need is it? Because oftentimes we've seen these projects, the agencies will come before us. We're not saying that these aren't needs or high needs, but they'll come before us and they'll say, no, this is dire, we absolutely need it, but it takes them 3 years to get there. So really, how dire was it if it took us this long to get to that point? And it's not one agency, it's multiple agencies for various reasons. Whether it's the additional funding that they need to raise, whether it's the project cost increases, turnover in their board, or in their staffing. So there's various factors that lead to delays in the project, including city projects. We're no different from the agencies, but we feel that putting in place these policies will allow the agencies to think through their process, think through their projects, and bring forth a project proposal that is ready to go. And once funded, they'll proceed to issuing the bids, pulling their permits, and moving to construction. So I know this was a lot of information, but these are essentially some of the things that we've identified as staff. And to assist, we're also looking to put together a checklist for these agencies to be able to ensure that their projects are going to meet those requirements, and for you as a committee to be able to review and say, in comparing these agencies and these proposals, here's where this project is in their process, and here's where this project is in the process, and that will maybe assist you in making a decision as to which one is closer to starting and finishing, and maybe we fund this project this year while this other project that is not as ready to begin construction comes back to us in future years. And also, the other thing which we didn't put in a policy document here, but we would like to consider what committee member Armenian recommended, which is, maybe looking at, and you might not be able to put this in writing or in a policy right now, but I think it would be a good rule of thumb to keep in mind is, you fund less projects with a higher amount. So instead of funding 4 or 5 different projects at 200, 300,000, you fund 2 major projects, at 600,000. And then that way you're giving these agencies something more substantial to work with and making it easier for them to be able to meet their project budget goals and being able to move forward with the projects quicker. The other thing that I think we will do as staff is I think we will also bring forth, when we do our quarterly reporting and we tell you where these projects are in their process, because of the fact that we've got the timeliness issue, I think we're going to need to be a little bit more strict with our agencies and ask for, where are you in your process? And if we feel that they're nowhere near starting, then we're going to ask them to release the funds so that we could reprogram them and just be realistic and honest. Because at the end of the day, I think with the city getting less funding, not being able to meet our requirements, we're actually going to impact them because we're not going to have any funds to be able to help them with in future years. So I think we just need to work together to say, like Catholic Charities, like I'm not ready to start this year, so I'll release the funds and, you could maybe consider me next year for a higher amount, or, you could take that money and give it to another agency that is almost, ready to start and maybe help them push them along to be able to begin construction if funding is the issue. Again, there are several factors, but not having enough money is major. That concludes my presentation. We're happy to answer any questions you may have.
Great presentation, Ms. Alexani, and I'm sure we have lots of questions. And I know that Mr. Avedisian raised his hand first, and then Ms. Manukian, and I saw yours, and then yours. Okay,
Everybody.
let's go on.
Well, thank you for the report. This is extremely long reports. There's a lot of thoughts going through this process and there's recommendations. Couple of questions, and I just want to understand it correctly. First of all, the BABA process would be including on the 24-25 applications,
Correct.
right? The proposals that's what's going to be acted.
The BABA Act is impacting projects in fiscal year 23-24, so it technically will impact projects that were funded in the current cycle, but the information in the act will also be included in the RFP process. So this year we didn't have it in the RFP process because we weren't aware, like for fiscal year 23-24, but that doesn't mean that the agencies don't have to abide by it. Like they still need to meet the requirements, but it wasn't in the RFP. But for next year's RFP cycle, yes, the BABA Act will definitely be included so that agencies and the contractors they work with will know what those impacts are and what those requirements are. And Ms. Kavarian, please add if you.
Just as a reminder, it's over $250,000 in iron and steel at this time. So it's a staggered policy implementation. So for 24-25, it'll be projects over 250,000 in iron and steel material only.
Okay, thank you. Now, I understand as most of this recommendations the staff has given, it's about CIP projects. But I believe that also that some of this process, it really should be considered for the social services also. Because we have had issues with the past, some years ago, I think was the YMCA, if I'm not mistaken, or was the roof project that they couldn't get the right numbers. There's some couple of years back, it was like 6,000 square feet roof or something, that factor. Or the Hamas kind last year, that we didn't have the right information and without, or the, which one was it? The other organizations, the science. So I think that would definitely work with at least portions, a part of this recommendations, a few of them would definitely work with the social services. I would highly suggest that we should consider that also. That would help them more so than anything else. If it's not the project readiness, those are not the factors, but details, information, and preparing their applications, one is submitting, with having all that questions answered. So we don't come back to the meeting and they're in a hard spot, we're in a hard spot, we don't know if we recommend it, what is going to happen. If we don't recommend it, what's going to happen? They get upset that they didn't get their project approved or whatnot. So I would highly suggest that we should look, of course, if that is allowable by HUD. If there's something that we can, the HUD will give us more. Now, again, going back to BABA, I know it's just a learning process for you guys also. I'm still totally confused, not there. I need to sit down and read all the report, whatever you have supplied, to somewhat understand it better. But now, the projects that is coming up, the 23, 24 projects, and it's going to be in our RFPs and all the trainings and everything they're going to have, all the agencies they're going to receive. That's another layer, I think I mentioned earlier, that's another layer that is going to add on the staff work-wise and labor cost on the staff end of it. And of course, that's going to add on the project cost. Like right now, the Homeland their project from $300, $400, $500 project went to $900,000, almost $1 million project. So that's coming on top of that. Would we be able to, or the cities will be able to go back to HUD and ask for the difference, the add-ons, basically, or help to recoup that loss that the organizations are basically, because of the HUD, because of this policy, the projects, most of the projects are not going to be able to go forward, or everything else that we have in the process.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, committee member Avedisian, that is a great observation, and yes, there will be impact once we better understand what the city's obligation is going to be in monitoring the agencies and the contractors that the agencies work with. Not only is this going to impact the agencies, but it's also going to impact city projects. And when we staff addressed that question to the, to the deputy assistant secretary, she said that they're still working through all that, and they didn't have clear answers as to what that expectation will be. And so I think, as they worked through the guidance, all she could tell us was, please just tune into all of our webinars that we're offering so that you could better learn. As it's almost like as they finalize the processes, they're going to do webinars to provide that information to the cities and to the agencies. And so once we have a better understanding, I think we will probably come back to you with, this is what the impact is going to be on staff. And if that translates to we can only manage 1 or 2 projects a year because it's going to be that staff intensive, then that's another policy decision that you'll need to make in order for us to be able to administer the funds. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this isn't just impacting CDBG, this is all federal funds. So the BABA Act is going to apply to all federal funds. Any grants that the agencies apply for, it's going to be impacted. Like this act is going to apply to as well. So I think obviously their long-term goal is to keep everything in America, right? Build America, buy America. But they do understand that there will be larger impacts, and to an extent, she even mentioned that they don't know, there might be materials that America doesn't even have. So even if they wanted to, these contractors wouldn't be able to. So that's the level of analysis they're doing right now at the federal level to better understand the impacts of the act, to then be able to say, and I think that may result in further waivers. Right now, they have 3 waivers that they've already said that's out there, but I think that this might lead to more waivers that that HUD might even come up with. Waivers are basically where a project could apply and say, one of the waivers that Maggie talked about was public interest, non-availability, like the materials are just not available in America, even if I wanted to buy American. And unreasonable costs, like this act is going to lead to my project being 25% more expensive than it would be if I don't use American-made or American-built products. So these are waivers where agencies could apply and say, and the city would need to apply and say, you know, this project proposal meets this waiver requirement, and we need to request that from HUD. But unfortunately, that's just going to delay the process. So, you know, those are the types of analysis that we still need to do before the next RFP cycle to be able to tell the agencies, you know, these are waivers. So if these apply to your project, please identify that in your proposal so that staff could then turn around and, you know, present that to you and be able to go to HUD and say, will this project meet the requirements for that waiver, and will you waive it? So honestly, at this point, you know, it's a little, I mean, it's not premature, but it is a little premature. We wanted to give that information to you with the BABA Act to keep that in the back of your mind, but the details on how we're going to implement this, we really don't know, and HUD hasn't been able to give us that guidance yet. I believe it's this week, tomorrow, that we have a webinar that staff has signed up for. So we're hoping to get a little bit more guidance, and we'll bring you that information. And, you know, outside of this meeting, we'll also share that information with you. Mind you, we won't discuss it with you outside of the meeting, but we'll share the information for you to read through and be prepared for by the next meeting should you have questions. So as soon as we get information, we'll definitely share it with you. But you've got great observations, because yes, there will be impact, but what that level of impact will be, we're just not sure yet. It might just be as simple as, you know, the contractor certifying and, you know, signing that they will meet those requirements, and it's on the contractor. But obviously, we know that with policy decisions, if you can't hold somebody accountable in some manner, what's going to force them to meet those requirements? So at the end of the day, if we're ever audited, it's the city's going to, right, be impacted because the project didn't meet the HUD requirements. So we want to do our best to make sure that we are following through and making sure the agencies and the contractors that work for our agencies are meeting our requirements. But whether that will be, you know, we need to sit here and go through, you know, pages and pages of materials that these contractors will be using to be able to do their renovation, that, you know, the proposal that entails, we just don't know yet. And so we'll have to wait for that guidance in order to be able to make that decision.
So, Mr. Avedisian, did you get your answer, or do you have a follow-up
I
question?
did. I think just a one quick follow-up question, real quickly. Now, again, this is going to be on this current year, coming year, 23, 24, right? It's going to be on the RFPs.
For the 24, 25 RFPs. Yeah.
Okay, not the 23, 24. So, okay, that's a clarification, because this is right around the corner. They don't even know what they want. So how are we, as the city, is going to go after them and ask this? Okay, thank you.
Ms. Manukian.
Thank you. So I have a preliminary question and then a real question. So preliminarily, you said that you had met with the HUD regional representative. Have you vetted these recommendations with them to know whether this will give us the leniency that we're looking for? And have you also checked with other municipalities to see what they're doing? I'm assuming the answer is yes, because you're both smiling.
Committee Member Manukian, yes. So when we met with the HUD representatives, we actually had prepared, you know, our recommendations that we're going to bring to the board to share with them, obviously letting them know that these aren't final, these are just staff recommendations. And, you know, they didn't vet through them, but they, in reviewing them, because they know that you're the decision-making body and so is City Council, they said that they were great recommendations, and it actually shows that the city is working towards meeting ensuring that we meet our timeliness requirements for future years. So yes, we did present a majority of these. I think maybe one of them may have not been on that list, or maybe all of them were. But yes, we did present it to them. And for other agencies, Burbank actually reached out to Ms. Kavarian this week asking us what we're doing, because they're in a similar situation. So I think everyone's kind of, now that HUD's coming through and, you know, the whole pandemic leniency is over and HUD's looking for some substantial steps towards meeting those guidelines, I think everyone's kind of working towards that.
But you feel comfortable that these recommendations will earn us some leniency to the timeliness requirement? I mean, there's no way of guaranteeing, but you have a sense of...
Well, we feel that the policy recommendations will get us to will become will help us to be timely. I think it's like a work plan for us. So if we follow these recommendations, we will most likely be timely by 25, 26. That's my goal.
But we
the goal.
have the next couple of years that we're seeking leniency on because we are now implementing these
Right. And
policy
the way that
changes.
would work is, again, we would have to submit a work plan to HUD stating that this is the proactive measures we're taking to get to the timeliness.
So one more substantive question. The first recommendation about disqualifying proposals if there's repeated inability to comply after you've presented the strengths and weaknesses analysis. I was wondering, in practice, for the last year in which I participated in decisions, how often did you have to go back to the agencies after the first analysis was provided to them? Was it like everybody?
Ready?
So then, I mean, we're looking at a difficult decision to make.
Committee Member Manukian, yes, it is, but most agencies do end up correcting it by the time that you see it. So essentially, they wouldn't all be disqualified. It would be after the strengths and weakness analysis is provided to the agencies. If they still don't make their corrections and if they still aren't able to clarify, then at that point, we would consider disqualifying them to, I guess, for lack of better way to say it, to make your job easier, which would mean that there would be less proposals for you to consider, which would allow you to evaluate the remaining proposals more realistically, to be able to say which one seems to have which proposal seems to meet a higher need and or is more ready to be able to start the project, to be able to spend down the funds. So we can proceed to accept the proposals if they're not complete. I think it just makes it more difficult to have realistic comparison when you're looking at proposals if what you're seeing at the time during the meeting is not accurate or complete. So we'll do our best to push the agencies, and I think if agencies know that they will be disqualified, they might work towards a more complete proposal, and if they can't meet the deadline to submit it, because sometimes I think agencies will start really late in the process. They already know our process starts November and ends in December. So realistically, they don't have to start their project planning in November when proposals are due. So if an agency knows that there is a need, they know their roof is leaking, they know they need ADA improvements, they know that they need to convert rooms to be able to meet a certain need, to be able to meet their program needs. I think that agencies would work towards that project regardless. So I think this will maybe assist in eliminating some of the proposals that are, well, let's just try to secure some funding and work towards more funding, or let's work towards finalizing our project. We'll essentially be asking agencies to just come before you if they know that this is an absolute need, and regardless of whether they get this funding or not, this is a project that needs to get done. Because if they don't get the funding from you, they're going to need to get it from somewhere else because they otherwise can't operate without it. So it's also maybe allowing them to take turns. So you might have a project that doesn't have to get done this year, but it just needs to get done within 3 years, and it will allow that project to not apply this year because there's other agencies that are more ready, that are ready to go and will be applying for the funding, and maybe allow that agency to get funded more to be able to complete their project, and then that agency won't come back next year because that project will be complete and that dire need will no longer be there. There's also the other side of it, and this is harder to do with CIP, but setting your priorities. What are your priorities, and what type of projects would you like to prioritize, so that the agencies know that this is the type of project, or the agencies that serve this need will be prioritized this year. So the other agencies don't apply because that's not a priority for the committee. So just some things to consider, but it's our way of trying to make sure that what comes before you is ready to go and is going to, you could consider for funding and not be in a situation where you're giving small amounts to several agencies, but not helping any of them really substantially.
Thank you.
You're next.
I have a few areas I want to explore. Number one, on recommendation number one, is there a way where we can require the agencies to have more of whatever proposed projects that they're going to apply for, funding for, more baked and shovel-ready in this process, as opposed to it kind of idea stage, which is where they kind of tend to come to us from, and then they go back, and then they come back and forth with, whether or not it's realistic. In other words, can we front load more, even pre-application, where they can do more homework in advance so that it's kind of more prepped?
Committee Member Armenian, that was, recommendation number 4 was our way of trying to get to that point. So where we're saying that projects need to be ready, and it was really difficult for us as staff, and if you have any recommendations based on your experience or, your understanding of CIP projects, but it was really difficult for us to say you have to be at this phase in the project because every project is different. A roof, for example, a roof repair or a roof replacement is not as intensive. It doesn't need the permits like Ms. Kabanjian was explaining as, a splash pad project, which requires, county review and health department reviews and all of that. So it was really difficult for us to come to some sort of a conclusion that says a project will not be funded if you're not at this phase. If you have a recommendation as to what that phase could be that would allow us to give everybody a fair opportunity, we'd love to include that, but we couldn't come up with what that phase would be because every CIP project is different. So with recommendation number 4, we were basically trying to say that, proposals should reflect project readiness and completion or near completion of the following pre-construction activities. So if your projects require any of this, we want you to have it done before you come before us. Essentially, that was kind of the shovel-ready. Our original term was shovel-ready, but we needed to define what shovel-ready meant so that the agencies knew, and the more we thought through that, we couldn't come up with that definition per se. Ms. Kaverian, if you want to add.
If I can just add, on page 6 of this report, at the bottom of page 6, right before the fiscal impact, staff will also provide a CIP checklist as a guiding document for agencies' work to date for the committee to use to evaluate project readiness and commitment. So what we'll do is we're proposing to have a checklist, and this was actually, I think Chair Quinones Gabrielian had recommended that at the last meeting, because what we did was we watched the meetings from previous sessions and took all your recommendations to account, and then we put together this report. And that checklist idea is to, at least for you to have a visual of, okay, where is this proposal? Where are we here with this particular proposal versus this one? But it might not be a check against another proposal, it'll just be a check against itself in a sense. So you don't compare, for instance, like Ms. Kabanjian said, the roof versus something more intricate.
And the checklist would be provided to the applying agencies, right?
Actually, I think we would put the checklist together or possibly have a checklist ready for the committee to review. We're still actually trying to figure this all out.
I know, but my recommendation would be just like, when you're having a graded assignment at school, you want the rubric, you want the checklist as to how you're going to get the A. So if we're going to have a checklist to check off, I would rather them know about that checklist so they can meet it.
What I would recommend adding to this is a project timeline, assuming, like, it doesn't have to have dates, because you don't know when you're going to get approval, but a timeline, meaning from the point of approval, X number of weeks, you get this, X number of weeks, you get that, because usually a lot of the deadlines, the timelines slip, because we're not dealing with folks unless they're hiring people who are in this profession. But maybe that's part of the filter, where that's the only way these things get done. I mean, like YMCA has come to us, right? These architects are usually involved. I mean, this is their bread and butter. They should be able to provide that sort of thing. Like the big projects have all had that. A roofing project maybe hasn't, but maybe we should, to say, well, from the date of an approval, right, these are the phases in which the organization is committing to moving this along, because that way it puts them on the hook. I know they're volunteer boards most of the time, maybe they'll have one employee, but it still puts the board on the hook to say, we have to meet a certain regimen of getting these things done, otherwise things drag on. Let me move on to a couple others. I continue to say, and this has to do with 1N4, which is some sort of deadline and execution, like a final deadline. It can be generous, but a deadline where it gives us the ability to say, you know, if it goes beyond that deadline, we're going to take the money back and reapportion it to other projects. Recommendation 2, I would recommend it be a little bit stricter. I think you're being generous. I would say, and we've had this discussion before, we've always asked this question, hey, you've got 2 projects in the pipeline, you haven't even started those, now you're in front of us asking for more. We've had this discussion multiple times. I would say 1 project at a time. Complete the project, then come to us with another proposal. I know there's needs, but that 2 would incentivize, I think, hey, let's get one done so that we can apply on the next round. Number 3, I know we're saying 2 general contractors, but we've had multiple examples, just one we talked about today, where they couldn't get 2 contractors. And just because of the, like I said, the red tape, the prevailing wage, et cetera. So I don't know if we're setting them up for failure with recommendation 3, even though, of course, I'm all in favor of multiple bids, because that's when you know you're getting the best price. But given the other bureaucratic elements to this process, I question whether or not that's realistic. The final point I'll make is this is going to require, whatever we adopt here as changes, is going to require a different communication process and orientation with the agencies so that they kind of know what to expect. We're coming up on an RFP process. We just approved the timeline on it. And I am a little bit worried about setting the expectations as soon as possible so that we give the agencies the time to work this into their planning. You can't go in 3 weeks before we release an RFP and say, guess what, there's all these new requirements. Next thing you know, we might get no applicants and we got all this money sitting around. So just let's consider how we execute whatever recommendations we end up adopting. I think we need to accelerate that direct communication with the typical, at least with the typical agencies that have had projects, to say, look, there's some new rules of the road here. Thanks.
Any comments from staff on that? Or just, we can go.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we'd love to hear the rest of you address some of the stuff.
Couple of questions to clarify hot guidance before I get to my questions. So one is, if I'm not mistaken, they could not have the same contractor who gave the original quote to bid on the project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And I'm gonna get to my question to that. And the next one, the funding. How do we fund the agencies when the construction actually starts? Do they use their money first?
So the way that works is the agency pays the contractor and we pay the agency within 30 days.
among phases,
among each pay app, each submitted invoice.
and that submitted invoice, it's a schedule that earlier we said it's a contractor's schedule timeline that is submitted prior. We have that beforehand, or the scheduling comes after all the approvals?
So the scheduling, that document comes during the AIA agreement time.
So after funding recommendation comes
Correct,
in.
way after.
Thank you. So the reason I ask this question is because some of these things, again, having two, which I agree with Mr. Armenia, that having two, already we're eliminating two potential, or at least one potential contractor that can actually bid and get the project going. So eliminating two, now we have to look and find the third one that we already having problems with that, especially with the prevailing wage to be written on it. That even narrows it down to a smaller group of contractors who can actually give the bid. As far as the funding part, the reason I asked that, obviously we want to cramp all the projects in one to have a larger dollar amount, but it could also raise the issue of, do they have those fundings to do that as they get the checks for them to take a bigger project? Some people can take it smaller projects at a time because of amount of money they have to spend on it until they get reimbursed. So we obviously want to eliminate most of the work that is done before, then keep continuing adding to it. But earlier I saw somewhere it says incomplete application proposed project does not meet HUD guidelines. Didn't we do that until now already? I mean, if an application doesn't meet the HUD guideline, did it come to us? Or it was already disqualified before coming to the...
Committee Member Arabian, for the most part, if a project definitely did not meet HUD guidelines, we would have disqualified them. So there are some projects that are borderline or they're not as high of a priority. And, you know, this is probably more specific to public social service projects. So that's, you know, I know Committee Member Avedissian said some of these policies could be applied to public social services as well, and that definitely is something we want to consider, but because timeliness and HUD and CIP was, the amount for the CIP is larger, we focused on CIP, but we definitely, you know, would like to apply some of this to public social services as well. But with CIP projects, I don't think we've had any projects that didn't meet the HUD guidelines. And if they did, we asked the agency to modify the proposal in order to be able to meet those requirements. But again, it was just kind of in place to just say, you know, should there be, this is another reason why we would disqualify. But I don't think we've had any projects that we've pushed through, even if they didn't meet the guidance. Public social service,
Yeah, it makes sense. So
With CIP projects, anything that we even consider, we always actually submit to HUD beforehand to make sure that they are eligible, even city projects. So that's something that we always do ahead of time, so we don't waste an agency's time to apply.
So back to whether one project at a time or two, obviously I'm for it to do one project at a time, but sometimes there are, even though we have 6 months overlap based on the numbers you said, but sometimes there are projects that has to work hand to hand. Like, for example, if you're doing windows, you have to do flooring. I mean, I'm not a contractor to say, but sometimes you have, for example, if you have to do the solar, you have to do the roof first. And, you know, you can't wait too long to do one project or the other. So definitely I'm okay to do one at a time, but sometimes you have to do 2 or 3 projects because they overlap, because they're connected as a project. So that's something we have to watch out for. So if we writing it down, we should have some kind of a disclosure that we can give them that exception if it needs to be, because the type of the project that they'll have.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
I was just wondering, well, maybe if we are giving more money to less applicants, you could actually say, consider the whole holistic version of the project, right? Like, don't come to us like, oh, we want to do the bathroom only. Like, come to us, say, like, what's the facility need? It needs a roof, it needs this, it needs that, and maybe that way they can build it into a kind of a plan, like a overarching plan that gets at what you're talking about.
But then it becomes matter of dollar.
Yeah, because I think they don't do that because they worry about, oh, there's not gonna be enough
size.
dollars.
Or different contractors.
So let me, cut it down, but maybe if we are actually going out to say we're gonna be giving more money to less applicants so that you can do a more holistic project, you can get at that.
Yeah, something so we can brainstorm, because again, not only that, then it's maybe multiple contractors, because one is specialized in one thing and the other. So you can have the solar person go with my roofer's timeline. Solar person can say, I'm busy for next 12 months and so on. So, I mean, we all, again, I'm for it, but we have to brainstorm it to make sure we got all the, dotted all the i's and the t's crossed, so we won't run into a problem, and then adjust as we go along, which I'm sure we'll do that anyway.
Can I comment on this one proposal? Sorry. I agree in concept, but I think that the recommendation should stay as it is. And then when we're considering the applications, if they don't go hand in hand, or we feel like another project is more worthy and this one organization has too many, at that point, we can use our judgment. But I think to say that in black and white, that you can only have one project at a time, that might be too restrictive for reasons that Mr. Gabriel explained.
Yeah, I think so. I think we should
How are you
just.
feeling? Sorry.
That's fine.
So I think that it should stay as that, and then our consideration should be different.
So these are few stuff that I'm thinking, yeah, great. And as far as shovel ready, I think, or we're not going to use that term, but I don't think they should have a problem. I think they should do their study, because if they're going to go to engineers, the architects and all that stuff, they're going to do the drawing because they know they have a project. I don't think any agency gonna just shoots in the dark. I want to do the bathroom, but I have no idea how. Give me the money and then I'll let you know. So if they go through that process, to actually get to the point that the permits or the plans are ready to submit, or even maybe submit, because after approval, they have 12 months until they get the permits get expired. So they do have enough time to do most of the work prior to actually requesting the funding. I don't see why not. I think they should be able to do that part. And that makes it even faster for them for projects, because they're ready to go. Most of the work is done. They get to do construction much faster, so second projects could kick in much faster.
I may just exactly what you're saying, because of the soft cost, most of the soft cost, it's on the agency already. So they're gonna have to spend that money before to get to the second stage or third stage. So that I think that would be something, if it's not 100% shovel ready, at least
I mean, if they,
days before
if they
shovel ready or
submit
something
the
like that we
project-
can give some leeway.
if they submit the project to the city, they don't have to pull the permits. They don't have to
Right.
pay for it, but they have it stamped and approved. That itself, it's a long process. And then after funding, they can go ahead and pay for it if they don't want to spend the money prior to for the permit purposes. Anyway, these are great stuff. I agree with all these, but we just have to be careful which, we need to clean it up, I would say, a little bit more.
I have some questions too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know that these are very thoughtful, and what you already presented to us with Baba coming along, and some of the other things that these new policies that, will probably get approved in some form or another, do we require attendance at the CDBG, CIP workshops so that we can make sure that, we go through all of these? If they are going to supply us with a proposal, with a request for money, do we require that they attend the workshops?
We highly encourage them, but at this point, if it's a mandatory, we would entertain that, if you'd like to include that as part of the policy recommendation.
I'd like to
Is that
say-
allowable, HUD?
It's,
It's up,
What up?
it's truly up to the city to decide that.
Chair Gabrielian, Quinones Gabrielian, members of the committee, we think that's a good recommendation. We definitely don't have that, and it didn't cross our minds, but I think now that you mention it, personally as staff, I think it would be great, just like we require, like when we do bids, we require that you be present during the bid walk so that you can know what we want. Similar to that, I think if an agency is serious and would like to apply for funding, then I think we should require them. The only thing that I could think about is if an agency, if there is an agency, and I don't know any that wouldn't know that we're here and we exist and we give funds, because for the last several years, we've been sending out emails to over 100 nonprofits in Glendale. But the only thing I would think about is if there is, a new nonprofit that didn't know we exist or about the opportunity. But I think we start our technical assistance like in September. So now would be the time for them to, attend the meetings and require that they're there before they submit an application.
I would actually say I would be more concerned of our return agencies, because they are so comfortable with our process that they may not attend knowing the process. But now that we have the BABA Act, for instance, we're going to present that to them.
And we have new policy.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So maybe a mandatory attendance would be a very good way to kind of kick off the 24-25 season.
I'd like to recommend that. I think that's,
Just to add to your, because in our financing, obviously, HUD has those fundings. If you go through those programs of HUD, you have to take those classes after they give you the fund, which we're using it in our daily basis. So they do have mandatory classes that you have to take on some programs that you use of HUD money. We have it in our mortgage lending.
as far as number 3, I have to agree that many of these things, 1, 2, and 4, are definitely within their control. Number 3 is out of their control. And we saw today where, they had one contractor come through. And I really think that we're tying their hands with number 3.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian and Committee Member Armenian, and I know you had brought this up about the 2 general contractor estimates. Our fear is that they're doing it the back end because they had to go look for estimates after the fact because they didn't even want to believe that 940,000 could be an estimate. It might be best to, and we understand that it is a hardship because once you use 2 contractors to get you estimates, they're out of the bidding process in the future. We've considered that as well. Our thought process was that a lot of these contractors bid on all our projects, and we can kind of play musical chairs and have a couple, give proposals for one project and not the other, and then they can kind of swap themselves and get that bid versus the other one, get that project versus the other project. So those are the considerations we were making as we were discussing these policy recommendations. But they are, at the end, they're going to have to get estimates, and that's what they're doing now. They're looking at it. Once they're in the bid phase and they're realizing, wow, this is really expensive, I don't believe this, they are reaching out to contractors to see, is this really true? This is how much it costs? And yes, it actually does cost this much. So that's kind of where our thought process was. If we can get 2 general contractor estimates, they can have a realistic number and maybe not apply, or apply and say, we could do this with our leverage as well, because that's where we're at this point.
That's another thing. Now, you brought up the next part with their leverage as well. I know that, do we have, will we require proof of funding availability of the amount that they're leveraging? I remember a few years ago when the YMCA first came to us, they were leveraging 80%. Then the next year, they were leveraging 60%. And the next year, it went way down, but it was like almost, we give them a lot of bandwidth, to sort of come back every year and ask for more. And I think that's good and bad. It's good and bad, but for example, right now, we know that they need 197,000 that they don't have yet. But hopefully they'll have it by the end of the project, or they'll come back next year and ask for more money. I don't know. I'm not sure where does it stop and where is a good point to say, prove that you are leveraging this much.
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, that is a good point. Minus the provide proof that you have the leverage, you also could identify a percentage for leverage and say that you want to see a minimum leverage of 20%, 30%, whatever that is, and make sure that at a minimum that agencies are providing. That would be a minimum requirement, but definitely not a maximum, meaning, you might want to consider an agency that has higher leverage because you don't need to give as much and they're more likely to proceed with the project. So you definitely don't want to limit yourself or put it out there that you are okay funding if it's just at a 20%. But I think it might help to say that, as a body, if you want to say that you expect all proposals in order for them to be considered to have leverage of X percentage. Now, providing the proof is another thing we can require, but it would be difficult for us to require because all of these agencies would need to go either purchase some sort of a bond or identify some sort of an account that they would need to put the money in, and we're not guaranteeing them the funds. So we can request that once the agency is funded, we can ask that they, either purchase some sort of a bond that assures us that there is that kind of money, or that the money that they're identifying as leverage is put into some account, into an account where the city could see that that's where the money is and they have it readily available before we enter into a contract. We can definitely add that as an additional step, but that would only be for agencies that are approved from funding. We wouldn't be able to probably mandate that of proposals because an agency wouldn't want to go through all of that if we're not going to guarantee them their funds. So we can definitely consider that. If that's something you want to
Becomes too much restrictive, I think. We're too much of it, giving them restrictions. Let them be whatever they come in with, whatever percentage. And then we'll see as the day goes or as the applications we look into, then we can decide it. Because I think there are certain things that like these policies or these recommendations are great. Then every time, if we push them too tough, and we're talking about too many red tapes, then people will not come in. If they, at this point, when they applying, maybe they only can leverage 10% per se. And then during the process or before getting the funding, they know they have 20%, they have 30%, whatever leverage, or vice versa. Now they have 30% leverage they can do, but then they come down to the project and they can't. Then they return the money if they can't leverage it or they
I
can fulfill the
understand.
project.
We're looking for a balance. We do want to help them. We want to help them. That's why we're here. But I'm just saying, just so that we can really, and I understand we can't ask for it during a proposal period. So during that process, it's just something to think about as we go through and
just to add, Chair Quinones Gabrielian and members of the committee, when they get to the construction phase, you'd be surprised how many change orders come forward. And those costs go up. That original amount is never that original amount. It always goes up. And with one of our projects, I think the change order is at $23,000 at this point. So YMCA is paying $23,000 more than they anticipated just because they found, what was it, water damage from, once you start the concrete pour and you notice new things. So these things do come up. So these are things that we do explain to the agencies that will come up, and you should have some sort of backing before you move forward with projects. So leverage-wise, I think we understand that I'm hoping that they understand, and we've told them this, that you can anticipate these types of situations in construction.
Ms. Manukin, did you have a comment? Or no?
I do.
I was just going to say that I think that the budgets usually have a contingency percentage in there. Or they should?
It's a 10% contingency, yeah. And we're higher than most.
Yeah.
It's usually 5%, but we are 10% contingency.
Yeah, I think most of these agencies being nonprofit, they do fundraising for them to get those funds. They don't have any other resources. And sometimes they don't want to do the fundraising unless they know that it's a project going or there's fundings. Then they present to their members for fundraising. So it's one of those, which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? But definitely, anyway, they need to do the funding before they get reimbursed. So they need to raise a minimum and some backing. So I know it's be very hard for us to ask them to have
We want to
that.
be more of a carrot than a stick.
Right, especially depending on the agency. I mean, some
All right.
agencies, they have cash reserves, but some, they go year to year.
Okay, and then I just wanted to agree with a recommendation that Mr. Armenian made about deadlines, putting in some type of deadline. But we could probably do something more, instead of just one big deadline, can't we do it like ID completion stages, just like the contractor does when they identify, when they say, I want to get paid at 1/3 and I want to get paid at this. So what does that mean? Isn't that correlating with, I know it doesn't correlate with our monies because we're only funding a percentage of the entire project, whereas the contractor puts in completion stages for the entire project. But maybe instead of just one final deadline, do a 1/3, 2/3, are you on schedule? And are you going to meet that final deadline?
Chair Quinones Gabrielian, I think we already require a project timeline to answer Committee Member Armenian's question. We do require a project timeline. We could be more strict with our timeline and making sure that agencies are meeting their timeline. The other thing we could do is once the project starts construction, I don't think we could limit them in the sense of, because they're already secured and have an agreement with a contractor, not that we can't, but unless there's a serious reason why we don't feel comfortable continuing to fund the project, it might be a hardship for the agency if we pull the funds then. I think what we can do, if it's something you want to consider, is look at holding them to their timeline. So if they are presenting to you a 1.5-year timeline from the time that, construction begins or from the time that contract is awarded, then we could do a check back, maybe in a year or in 6 months. And if that project hasn't even started or pulled permits or identify some phase in that process where if you're not even there within a 1.5 years into your contract, then it's automatically you lose the funds. Because if you haven't even, let's say, gotten to issuing your bids a 1.5 years into your project, then really was this a dire need, and should we have given you funds? Like, these are things that I know they sound harsh, and I know personally I feel like I'm a little more black and white with the agencies. I know they do great work and they all need the funds to be able to do this, but I feel like we're also jeopardizing the city and potentially other agencies that could have spent the money, or even city projects that we could have funded at a higher level to be able to move them along faster. So I think there are different decisions. It's a difficult decision for you as a committee. And I think if we put the policies in place from the beginning where agencies know that you're black and white, this is what the requirement is, and if you can't meet that requirement, then please don't apply this year. Get your ducks in a row, come back next year, because we definitely want to fund you, but we want to fund you where we know you're going to be able to proceed and spend down our funds. Otherwise, you're jeopardizing everybody else in our community. So I think that's just the hard conversation that we need to have with the agencies and be able to say, look, we think you do great work. You all deserve the funds. But if you each are holding a small pot of money, then we're essentially not going to be able to help the community as a whole. So we heard, your comments. I think what we'd like as staff is, if you want to take the opportunity to kind of give us a little bit more direct direction on, for example, we heard some of you are not comfortable with limiting it to one proposal at a time. So do you want to keep it at 2 proposals, or do you want to, and then maybe during your evaluation period, just keep that in the back of your mind that unless this project is, the first project is almost complete, don't consider funding them. They could apply. Nothing stops them from applying for another project and having 2 in the pipeline. You just don't have to fund them, and that could be something you take into consideration. So, that was one thing where I think we heard different comments on. So if you could maybe.
Comment on your question since you're on this project.
Yes.
Can we, I don't know if it's legally, can we do that per case by case, knowing, for example, this person applied for HVAC and we know there's nothing tied to it? Can we say, okay, you can't apply that particular time and agency, or we can't do that? It has to be straight up a guideline or a policy.
Meaning on a case-by-case basis, determine whether somebody could apply for another one? I think it would be very difficult for us as staff because we'd be making that determination whether to say they could apply or they can't apply. That's why we say that if you want to leave it what we're proposing, which is they could, if they have a current project that's funded, they could apply for a second project as long as they know that that first project is near completion. And near completion basically means, for example, let's take the Y, for example, right? We're about to start our next cycle for fiscal year 24-25. The Y currently has funding. They're in construction, right? They're actively working on their project. Come December, when proposals are due, technically the Y is currently funded for a project. They may or may not be done by December, but we know that by next July, which is when the funds will be awarded, right? Because our proposals are due in December. You evaluate them in March. We don't enter a new contract until July of 2024. So as long as the Y is done with their project by December of 2024, you can consider their project, because when they come before you in, March, April, when you're evaluating the proposals, you could ask them, how far along are you with your construction? And they'll tell you, well, we'll be done by July or we'll be done by December. So what we're proposing is that as long as they'll be done by December of the year that the funding is for, they could apply. And that would essentially give them funding for 2 projects at a time. So they could apply, but you could consider them on a case-by-case basis whether you think you should fund the second project or not. So if we can't consider on a case-by-case basis who should apply, but you could definitely fund them on a case-by-case basis.
In that case, they have to do all the work, get to us, and then we should say, no, I don't want them to do all that extra work, eliminate that extra work. But that's fine. I mean, I understand where you're going. Again, I'm not comfortable with one at a time, just because we will have cases that you would need most of them back to back.
Yeah, I agree with the way that it's worded with, 2 at the most. I mean, we had organizations that had 4 at a time. So, I mean, I think you're getting to the point, and I'm comfortable with the way that it's worded.
Makes,
Yes.
like, actual proposals of how to,
Okay.
I'll give you an example. When, remember the Alma House? They came to us with 2 different houses they wanted to do at the same time, right? And then they cut it back to 1 because they realized they actually couldn't execute. It was like too much for them to handle. I think that's what this gets to, because I don't want us to go through the whole process and then they come back and say, oh, you know what, we kind of bit off more than we can chew and came back to 1. It's not always a funding issue, meaning like they didn't ask for enough, the cost went up, et cetera. A lot of the times it has to do with just capacity, organizational capacity to execute. And I think that's what number 2 is getting at. I mean, that's pretty, I think, generous still, even the proposal. I was suggesting we go a little bit harder on it, because I know that a lot of these organizations don't have the ability to hire an architect, let's say, to do all the project management around something. They're managing it in-house, and while they're running all their other operations and programs. So to me, we're kind of doing them a favor by saying, don't bite off more than you can chew. Do 1 project at a time. And if they do have things that are interconnected, like Mr. Garibian was saying, then throw it into the proposal, right? Even if it's like, hey, there's a phase 1, phase 2 to this, right? At least they've considered, and they're not doing it all at once. And it's one, you're kind of like, you're going to come back at it, throw some more money at it in kind of, let's say, a supplementary phase. But we have to get at this, because I think this is a capacity issue, the ability to process the amount of work that it takes. And we know there's also a lot of bureaucratic red tape involved in this, which kind of takes away from the capacity to actually execute.
If I may, Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the advisory committee, another factor that's in play, we're estimating $1.2 million in potential funding for 24-25 for CIP. So knowing what we know, knowing what the bids are coming in at, we know that 1.2 million is not going to go too far with possibly 2 projects, maybe not. So these are things to consider as well. So potentially you're only going to be able to fund 1 or 2 projects if the city doesn't have projects as well. Just something to consider. So not to delve too long on the recommendations. It really is going to be, realistically, you're only going to have 1 or 2 projects you can fund at this point, just knowing what we know at this point.
Were you going to take a stab at JG?
Yeah, I was going to make my proposal for how it should be changed. My position is that number 2 should stay as it is. I propose to change number 3 to say proposal should include recommended, or it is recommended to include 2 general contractor estimates, required to include 1. That way, we're telling them that come to us with 2 because that's what we want to see, but we're not cutting off certain projects just because they couldn't get that bid. And I would like to add the requirement for to attend the mandatory attendance to the orientation or informational meeting. So those are that's my position as to how this should end.
Committee Member Manukin, if I may, the recommendation that we're adding, which is to attend the mandatory meeting, would it be the technical assistance meeting or the open house or both?
Technical assistance meeting is what I was getting to, because that's where you go through.
Okay, perfect. Just clarifying so we can include it.
Where they should understand what their submission should be, that one.
So I'll take that as a motion.
Yes.
Is there a second?
If I may, or what about the other ones, that like recommendation 1 or recommendation 4? Don't include those?
I'm fine with 1, 2, and 4 staying as they are. I propose to change recommendation 3 to say, recommend to have 2 general contractor estimates, require at least 1, and then add a 5th one to add the mandatory attendance to the technical assistance meeting.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for clarifying.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
I offer an amendment.
Yes. Well, would you accept an amendment?
Of course.
Depends on what it
Well,
is.
yeah, depending on what it is. You can speak.
You can speak then, let's see.
My amendment on, this has to do with number 2, that maybe the hybrid between what I'm saying, which is 1, and you're saying leave it as is maybe we could say it is recommended that you only take on 1 project at a time unless they have some sort of connectivity to each other, but not make it a hard rule. I just want to signal, I'd like to signal to them that they really need to consider whether or not they have the capacity to handle more than 1.
Can you also say something like, can you say,
Just like-
can you
just like-
repeat that? Agencies cannot, no, it is recommended that agencies,
You would put a sentence before it that you would say in the affirmative, they would say it is recommended that agencies apply for 1 project at a time. However, if there are multiple proposals, they cannot be funded for more than CIP projects at any one time. unless the first funded project is already in construction.
Okay, so we add the sentence, but we still keep this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
maximum, 2 CIP projects
In other words,
at
it'd
a
be an
time.
addition of a sentence that kind
Okay.
of signals our recommendation of one project at a time.
I'm not sure if Ms. Kavarian got that, but I think I didn't. So if you don't mind, could you clarify? Because the way that it is right now, it's suggesting that they cannot be funded for more than 2 projects at one time, meaning the maximum they can be funded is 2. So they can't be funded for more than 2, but they can only apply for the second proposal to be considered for funding if their first project that's currently in construction will be completed within a year of the application date. And their application date is essentially due in December of every year. So if by December of the following year, their construction will be complete on their first project, they can apply. But if they know their project that they're currently funded is not going to be completed by December of the following year, they shouldn't even apply, if that makes sense.
I think it's fine the way it is. I know what you're trying to go, but pretty much she does what you say by force.
Only thing that I think we could add to get to your point of don't apply for more than 1 at a time, meaning let's say that an agency doesn't have funding at all. They shouldn't apply for 2 at the same time. So in any given application year, they shouldn't submit more than 1 proposal, is essentially what I understand you trying to say, right? Like Alma House, for example. You don't want Alma and Campbell House to be submitting proposals in the same program year.
That's part of it. It's not all of it, but that is part of it. I think sometimes organizations also throw in multiple proposals knowing that, well, let's see if I get this one. If I don't get this one, I'll get that one.
Aura did that
Yeah,
too, right? They
we've-
did
we've
the
had
HVAC,
examples.
They did the 4 and 3.
Yeah.
And then
That's an example of where they should be just saying, these are the overall needs of the facility.
We can add that, agencies cannot be funded for more than 2 CIP projects at any one time, can only apply for 1 project at a time in any given program year, and can only submit a proposal for a second CIP project if their first funded project is already in construction and will be completed within a year of the application date.
I think that hits it.
Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because then if they didn't complete it, they're automatically not going to get the
All
second.
right, good. You accept the amendment, you accept it as a second?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Now
and,
take roll call.
yes, thank you.
Committee
Oh, wait,
members.
sorry. Anything else?
Yeah, just on number 4, I know we covered with those words most of the stuff, but can we add some words to it or make it in a way to be more ready? I mean, I know with these line items we have, pretty much we're telling them to be ready, but I don't know how, because it's very general lines instead of, how can we be more strict on that portion to be more of paperwork ready at least, or, I mean, again, shuffle ready, we don't want to use that words, but, I mean, the last line is it's great, permit status of plan check, status meaning submitted to already plan check, that's what plan check is.
I think, Committee Member Arabian, the reason why we didn't recommend a specific language is because we couldn't
Yeah,
think
it's
of a
tough.
language that would not limit some agencies that may not need to go through all of these phases. What I could tell you is maybe between now and the next meeting where we bring the RFP, as we develop the checklist, we'll spend a little bit more time in reviewing it and seeing if we can come up with some recommended language that will not limit certain project types, but will put enough of a restriction on others so that they know that they have to be at a certain phase in the project process in order to be able to be considered. Right now, at this meeting, I honestly, unless one of you could recommend language, we couldn't think of one that would not limit them without listing all the different types of projects and then putting, if your project falls within this, you can't apply unless you're here. If your project falls within this, you can't apply if you're here.
Too much.
It would just be too restrictive. We tried, but we couldn't come up with something before this meeting, but that doesn't mean that we won't work towards it by the next RFP cycle. So if we can come up with, if that's what, you want us to consider, we'll keep thinking towards how else we could limit or clarify what the limit is and propose it at the next meeting where you're reviewing the RFP language. And if we can't, then, we consider it for next year. We go through this process and we consider it for future use.
Pretty much number 4 helps them with the number 2. I mean, if they have most of the number 4 done, if they want to apply for, say, that most of the job is done, so it'd be easier for them to apply for the second because they'd be early on into the construction.
Or number 1, right?
Or number. Thank you.
I think for
Okay,
both.
so we're ready for roll call then.
Committee members Armenian,
Yes.
Garibian,
Yes.
Menuchyan,
Yes.
Vice Chair Avedisian,
Yes.
and Chair Quinones Gabrielian.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. A lot of work. Why don't we now go to committee and staff comments? We'll start with committee comments. Start here. Or do you want to start here?
Um,
Mr. Avedisian.
Comments? Well, I don't have a comment in reality, but just again, thank you for the staff for all they do and prepared, especially today. There was a lot of information. I mean, I learned quite a bit, especially the Baba project. That's a completely new thing that we'll have to study and understand it so we can follow whatever it needs to be done with the new projects coming in. Again, appreciate the staff and thank you. I think our next meeting, one quick question, the next meeting, which is October 23rd, is that an all-day meeting or it's an afternoon meeting?
It would be most likely an afternoon meeting.
Perfect. I'll be arriving in the morning to back LA, that's why. I just want to make sure.
All right. Any other comments?
I don't want to miss the meeting.
I just want to say thanks also for all this preparation, but I also especially want to call out the policy recommendations. Really appreciate the thoughtfulness in that. I think that's going to help us get to a better place in terms of being more impactful with what we do and kind of managing through the evolving new requirements. So hopefully at the next meeting, we could also discuss kind of the, or in between, I guess by email, the communication plan around that, which I had mentioned, because I think resetting the expectations with the agencies is going to be important. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you to the staff. Again, I know lots and lots of hours go behind this work you guys do, the policy recommendation, preparing all these details, and as you see, even other cities call you guys asking for help. So great job. I appreciate it. Thank you so much to all of you guys. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick thank you. And the part where you said you went through our meeting film to capture the ideas, I bet that took a lot of effort and time, so we're grateful.
I just have to echo all of the gratitude. Thank you. Very thoughtful, very, you're disciplined. You are disciplined, and I know that you are so essential. And so we'd like to hear from you now. So, Mr. Bulanikian, staff comments.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. Chair Quinones Gabrielian, members of the committee, I want to thank you for volunteering your time and making these tough decisions. Thank you for staff, Maggie, Tamar, and Teresa, as well as Iris, for preparing the reports and coming up with these recommendations. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome.
I
Maggie?
do have one thing to add, if I may.
Yes.
We actually presented Tamar Kabanjan to our Parks Commission for her full-time status, so I'd like to present her here at the CDBG Advisory Committee as well. Tamar started with us in April of 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and she started with us as an hourly city worker. As you can tell from the comments and the statements she makes, she is very knowledgeable in capital improvement projects, and she is our administrative associate now, full-time benefited, so we're very excited.
Yay, thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations, Tamar.
And we should also recognize Mr. Joseph Rodriguez. Joseph Rodriguez actually helped us with, our park planner helped us with the recommendations, especially the pre-construction, so.
That's great.
Recommendation number 4.
Great, thank you. Nothing? Nothing? Well then, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.